The ocean is deep, but more than that, it is hidden. A place where darkness begins not at midnight, but just meters beneath the surface. A world not lit by sun but by pressure, instinct, and the strange cold hunger of time. And tonight we're going to descend into that world, slowly, gently, and speak of the things that live where light refuses to go. Creatures not born of imagination, but of evolution's most secret branches. Animals that have adapted to places with no warmth, no horizon, and no mercy. Not all of them are large. Not all of them are monsters, but they all belong to a realm that is as real as the sea itself. And many have never been seen alive, only dredged up in nets, half dissolved by their own biology. Eyes too large for the surface, teeth designed not to catch but hold, as if they feared the deep might steal their prey back. So take a breath, let it out slowly, and remember, if this calms you, you can always come back. Subscribe, and we'll be here. Our descent begins in the pitch-black waters of the bathypelagic zone, around 3,000 meters below the surface. Here we meet the black dragonfish, a creature straight from a nightmare, if nightmares had patience. The dragonfish is only about 6 inches long, but don't let that fool you. Its mouth is lined with needle-like fangs so large, they can't even fully close their jaws. Its skin is coated with pigments that absorb almost all incoming light, making it nearly invisible even to other predators. And yet, despite this camouflage, the dragonfish glows not visibly, but in the infrared. It produces a kind of private illumination that only it can see, lighting up the darkness without ever revealing itself. Imagine hunting in pitch blackness, using a flashlight that only your eyes can detect. That's what this fish does, and it's not alone. Lurking not far away, we find the gulper eel, also known as the pelican eel. It has a body like a ribbon, and a mouth like a bag, capable of opening wider than its own body. The gulper doesn't bite, it swallows. Entire schools of fish can vanish into its maw in an instant. Its stomach expands like a balloon to accommodate whatever it manages to catch. No chase, no struggle, just an explosion of motion, followed by stillness as it digests the dark. And as it floats back into the void, its tail glows faintly, a soft blue light meant to lure in the next mistake. But not every creature in these depths is a hunter, some are watchers. The bali fish is one of the strangest animals ever discovered. Its head is transparent. You heard that right. Its head. 2 glowing green orbs sit inside a clear dome like twin periscopes staring straight upward. This fish floats motionless beneath prey, watching through the ceiling of its own skull, and when it's ready, it tilts its eyes forward, rockets up and captures its meal. Scientists have called it an evolutionary dead end, but perhaps that's just because we're not used to seeing something so literal in its design. A creature whose very brain is visible, watching, recording, remembering in silence. Now let's go deeper, past the abyssal plain, past the bones of old whales and the carcasses of ships that never saw land again. At around 6,000 meters, we enter the hadal zone, named after Hades, the underworld of the sea. Here the weight of the ocean above is nearly unimaginable. The pressure is so great it could crush a human submarine like a soda can, and yet, life endures. One such creature is the faceless cusk eel. When it was first pulled from the deep, scientists were confused. It had no eyes, no visible mouth, and no gills, just pale gelatinous skin and a strange motionless body. But on closer examination, they found its face wasn't missing, it was simply hidden. The creature's mouth is on the underside of its head, shielded from detection. Its eyes are buried beneath its skin, sensing only the barest glimmer of light. It doesn't need expression, it doesn't need recognition. It is the sea's best answer to a riddle. What does a predator look like if it never wants to be seen? Another ghost of this realm is the giant amphipod. Most amphipods are tiny, harmless, even. But in the hadal trenches, they grow massive, some as large as a human hand. They drift in packs, like drifting crustacean swarms, feeding on whatever organic material falls from above. A rain of decay. Their exoskeletons are translucent, almost glassy, as if the trench didn't fully finish forming them, and perhaps it didn't. Down here, time works differently. Pressure suspends metabolism, evolution slows, nothing rushes. Even death seems to take its time. But there are worse things. There is the deep steria jelly, a strange undulating sheet of translucent flesh that floats like a haunted bedsheet. It has no tentacles, no eyes, just a wide billowing membrane that contracts and expands in ghostly ripples. When it engulfs prey, It doesn't sting. It folds, wrapping the unfortunate victim in its body, and slowly digesting it from all sides. There's no struggle, no escape, just a slow floating coffin in the dark. And perhaps most eerie of all is the Magnapinna squid, a creature rarely seen. Only a handful of confirmed sightings exist, each one more disturbing than the last. With arms and tentacles that can stretch 10 times the length of its body, and elbow-like joints that bend at impossible angles, the Magnapinna moves like a puppet on invisible strings. It doesn't dart or flick or spin. It hovers, arms dangling straight down like threads hanging from some unseen master, watching, waiting, drifting in absolute stillness, as if the ocean itself had stitched together a marionette for purposes it hasn't yet explained. These creatures are not from myths. They are not from stories. They exist now, living lives we will never fully understand, under pressures we will never feel. They are not evil. They are not monstrous, but they are alien, not because of where they come from, but because of what they reveal. That Earth still has corners untouched by time, where evolution moves like a whisper and survival is written not in strength, but in strangeness. We've only just begun. Part 2. The ones that wait without eyes far beneath the surface, in that place where sunlight never reaches and sound moves like memory through molasses. There are creatures that do not hunt by sight. They do not stalk or chase or lunge. They wait, still as stone, silent as sediment, born into a world where the only certainty is darkness, and in that darkness, they have become patient architects of dread. One such creature is the sea spider, and though it shares its name with its land-bound cousin, it is something else entirely. Found across the globe, but growing truly strange in the abyss, deep-sea sea spiders are skeletal and long-limbed, with bodies so small and limbs so thin, they seem like outlines of an animal that never fully formed. They do not swim. They crawl, slowly, painfully, along the seafloor and over sponges and anemones, inserting a long needle-like proboscis into prey and drinking them dry. They have no lungs, no true circulatory system. Their blood is moved by their legs alone. Their heartbeat is their motion. They are creatures so distant from us biologically that it's still debated if they truly belong to the group we once thought. And yet there they are, walking the floor of the planet like forgotten warnings from an earlier time. Nearby, scattered along hydrothermal vents and methane seeps, you'll find colonies of the yeti crab, pale and hairy. These blind crustaceans cluster around boiling fissures in the ocean's crust, waving their claws in the chemical-rich water not to feed, but to farm. On their arms grow tufts of bacteria, cultivated and consumed slowly over time. The crab cannot see, it cannot hear, it can only feel vibrations in the volcanic water, the rhythm of vent pulses, the tremors of distant movements, and through this, it knows how to live, how to eat, how to wait. It grows its own survival, inch by inch, like patience made flesh. But not everything down here is slow. The vampire squid is a master of disguise, speed and silence. Despite its name, it does not drink blood. It does not chase prey. It floats in the mid-water twilight zone, where detritus rains from above like organic snow. Its name comes from its deep crimson skin, and the black webbing that stretches between its arms like a cloak. When threatened, it turns itself inside out, flipping its arms over its head, revealing spiny projections that look like jaws. It produces no ink. Instead, it releases a glowing cloud of bioluminescent mucus that shimmers in the dark and disorients would-be predators. And then it vanishes, fading back into the deep like a thought you almost had but couldn't hold. Farther out, where the pressure thickens and the floor rises into cold black ridges, lives the coelacanth, a prehistoric fish once thought extinct for 66 million years, until a living one was caught in 1938. With lobed fins that move like legs, and a jaw that unhinges in a strange vertical direction, the coelacanth swims with a quiet dignity, as if the world above is none of its concern. Its blood is cold, its movements are slow, its brain is small, but its life is long, and it reminds us that extinction is a story we tell when we stop looking. The deep doesn't forget as easily as we do. Now let's turn our gaze to the giant isopod, a creature that looks like a pillbug scaled up to nightmare size. Nearly the length of a house cat, this scavenger is armored, relentless and utterly without expression. It lives off the remains of whales, sharks, and anything else unfortunate enough to fall to the bottom. When food is found, giant isopods gorge themselves to the point of immobility, sometimes not eating again for years. There is no hurry, no urgency, only hunger, and the willingness to endure its absence for however long it takes. They lie buried beneath the silt, unmoving, waiting for the scent of decay to reach their antenna. Their world is one of patience and feasts that come only after years of famine. Then there are the deep-sea siphonophores, perhaps the strangest of all. Not a single animal, but a colony of individuals, each genetically identical, but specialized into different roles. Together they form a long floating body that can stretch over 40 meters, longer than a blue whale. The front guides, the middle digests, the rear stings and captures, a single organism composed of many. Their bodies glow with soft pulses of green and violet, drifting through the deep like living strands of code, suspended in a place where nothing else moves with such grace. To witness one is to see biology reimagined, life not as a singular thing, but as a system, a ghost caravan in the water, and still there are more. The anglerfish, with its terrible grin and bioluminescent lure, doesn't just use its light to attract prey. In some species, it uses it to attract mates. The male, when born, has no hope of survival. It cannot hunt, it cannot grow. Its only goal is to find a female, latch onto her body, and merge. He fuses into her skin, loses his eyes, his fins, his independence. Eventually, he is little more than a sack of testes, part of her body, feeding off her blood in exchange for reproductive material. It is parasitism and courtship and dependence all at once. A love story written in hunger and sacrifice. And beneath even these, beyond the range of our deepest manned dives, there are creatures known only from fragments, jaws without bodies, bones without names. Once a submersible passed through a current so cold and so quiet that all its cameras blurred. In the static, a shape moved, broad, slow, with arms not waving but folding, like a creature remembering how to be large. The crew dismissed it as artifact, but some still remember the shape and the weight of it, as if the ocean had briefly lifted something heavy to show it off, and then buried it again. This world is not empty. It is full of things we were never meant to see, or perhaps simply never asked the right way to find. They are terrifying not because they wish us harm, but because they do not care if we understand them. They were never waiting for us. They are not visitors. They are not guests. They are the original tenants of this planet. And in the stillness of the deep, they are watching, feeding, listening, always there in the dark beneath the light. Part 3, where the bones sink and don't return. There's a region of the ocean far below the point where light fades and pressure rules, a place oceanographers call the abyssal pelagic zone. But among those few who study what lives there, it has another name, the bonefall plains. This is where the bodies go, not just the tiny planktonic deaths that rain down daily like marine snow, but the large, rare falls, the final descent of whales, sharks, and once perhaps even larger things no longer seen. When a massive body dies and sinks to the abyss, it becomes a biome, a long, slow feast for the most alien creatures ever born on Earth. One such creature is the Osedax worm, known more hauntingly as the zombie worm. It has no eyes, no mouth, and no stomach. Instead, it consumes bones through chemical digestion, releasing acid to break apart the calcium, and then absorbing the nutrients with branching, root-like structures that reach deep into the marrow. A single whale fall may attract thousands. The Osedax attaches to the skeleton and flowers, yes, flowers, outward into soft feathery plumes, red and flowing, like some terrible underwater garden blooming from death. Males never grow. They live inside the females, microscopic and forgotten, their only function fulfilled before they are absorbed. The worms do not feed quickly. They take years to clean a skeleton, patient, tireless, and entirely indifferent. But they are not the only things drawn to bone. The hagfish is another scavenger of the deep, long eel-like, with a skull of cartilage and a body built for squeezing into tight places. It slides into the corpse of a fallen animal and begins to eat it from the inside out. But it doesn't bite like other predators. It raspes, using a tooth-like plate to grind flesh against bone, and when disturbed, it releases thick, choking slime that can suffocate anything in pursuit. It can produce enough mucus in seconds to clog the gills of a shark. Evolution didn't gift the hagfish with charm, it gave it defiance, a creature that survives not with strength, but with the refusal to die. Sometimes, something falls that isn't an animal, a shipwreck perhaps, a plane, a satellite capsule, or even a lost shipping container filled with discarded waste. Down here, everything that sinks becomes part of the seafloor, and in rare cases, those things are swallowed by something more unusual. In 2015, a deep-sea exploration team discovered a brine pool at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, nicknamed the Jacuzzi of Despair. It looked like a lake within the ocean, shimmering and rippling within its own liquid walls. But this water was hypersaline and laced with methane and hydrogen sulfide, lethal to most marine life. Fish that wandered in did not swim out. Crabs and eels floated lifeless in its border, stunned mid-motion. But within the pool lived a handful of strange survivors, tube worms, mussels, and microbial mats adapted to the toxic conditions. They fed off chemicals, not sunlight, not flesh. Some of the equipment that touched the pool came back corroded, not by salt, by something more caustic, more ancient. And beneath the surface of the brine, sonar picked up something solid, not rock, not a ship, just shape. But no one investigated further. The pool was left alone, marked, studied, but ultimately feared. There are places in the ocean where science ends, not for lack of curiosity, but because something older demands it. The further you descend, the more the familiar rules decay. Take the tripod fish, for example. It rests on the seafloor using 3 long rigid fins like stilts, facing into the current with its long pectoral fins stretched wide, feeling the water like a blind man's hands. It doesn't hunt, it waits. When prey swims past, it simply opens its mouth. It doesn't even bother to move, and perhaps it doesn't need to, because in the deepest currents, movement is a waste, stillness is survival. The fish doesn't need to chase. Sooner or later, everything that lives above eventually sinks. Deeper still, where even those patient feeders start to vanish, the ocean becomes a realm of anomalies. In the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench, unmanned probes recorded something unexpected: regular, rhythmic circular patterns in the sediment, nearly 4 meters wide and spaced with uncanny precision. At first assumed to be geological, the patterns later showed signs of movement, faint trails connecting them, drag marks, indentations, as if something large and soft-bodied was curling against the seabed, dragging itself slowly in looping paths over the years. No known organism matched the behavior, no evidence of feeding, nesting, or defense, just circles, silent, symmetrical, and spreading. Marine biologists remain divided. Some speculate a new species of cephalopod, others a colony of deep-dwelling echinoderms. But there's a third theory, whispered in the back rooms of academic conferences, that these patterns aren't made by an organism, that what we see is only the surface, like the top of a mushroom, while something far larger waits buried beneath, so vast and diffuse that we've mistaken it for geology. Imagine it, a being that spans kilometers, moving not in minutes or hours, but in generations of slow rotation. A creature so old it outlasts languages, so broad that it thinks in pressure, in mineral flow, in crust shifts. And when it feels your probe land above it, your submersible scrape a trail across its skin, it does not react, not yet. It remembers. And then there are the lights. Across multiple deep-sea ridges, cameras have caught unexplained flashes, not bioluminescence from known fish or jellyfish. These are slow, sustained pulses, geometric, sometimes forming a triangle of glow, sometimes a ring. In one instance, 3 independent submersibles recorded the same light pattern from hundreds of kilometers apart. The timing was exact, as if the ocean was signaling itself. Scientists propose geological discharge, methane ignition, or stress fractures releasing glow-causing chemicals, but none account for the symmetry. None explain why the pulses stop whenever observation becomes direct. These lights do not behave like accidents, they behave like habits, like messages. In the end, part of what makes these creatures terrifying is not their danger, not their size, but the silence around them. We have explored the moon in more detail than our own oceans. Every day things pass beneath us that have never been named. They are not waiting for discovery. They do not want to be understood. They are older than thought, deeper than fear, and they are still evolving in the cold dark beneath everything we know. We do not live on a planet with one world. We live on one above another, and below that, another still. Part 4. The things that shouldn't move but do. There is a kind of stillness that exists only in the deepest places. Not the peaceful quiet of a forest or the muffled hush of snowfall, but a deeper, more unnatural stillness, the kind that feels held in place, as though some vast pressure beyond comprehension has pinned everything to the floor of the world. Down in the Hadal trenches, beyond the reach of currents and life as we know it, the seafloor stretches out in strange folds and ridges like scars left behind by something we've never seen. Down here, things aren't supposed to move, and yet, they do. In 2016, a Japanese deep-sea expedition sent an autonomous crawler into the Izu Bonan Trench, a narrow fissure dropping nearly 10 kilometers into the Earth's crust. For the first 20 hours, the crawler roamed a lifeless landscape, just silt, rocks, and occasional shards of manganese crust. But as the crawler approached a drop-off near a tectonic scarp, it captured footage of something that still puzzles researchers to this day. A large rounded object, at first mistaken for a boulder, shifted slightly as the crawler passed. Not a tumble or roll, a tilt, just a few centimeters. Then it settled again. It had no appendages, no face, no eyes. It was dark, textured like volcanic stone, and utterly featureless. But the movement was deliberate, controlled, and after the crawler passed, its cameras caught one more thing. The silt beneath the object was undisturbed. Whatever it was, it hadn't pushed itself. It had moved from within. Later analysis found that similar movements had been observed in the Puerto Rico Trench, the South Sandwich Trench, and even near the Java Deep. Always the same shape, always the same behavior, as if these stones were not debris but dormant things, waiting not for food or light, but for time. Now imagine swimming past that shape in total darkness. Imagine not knowing whether it's alive or not, until it adjusts, slowly, just enough for you to know that it felt you pass, and chose this time, not to move again. Elsewhere in the deep, we find the giant lavaceans. These creatures are surprisingly small, about the size of a human hand, but they build structures that defy explanation. Encased in enormous mucus houses up to a meter wide, the lavacean floats suspended within a mesh of self-made tunnels and filters, carefully sculpted to trap particles from the water. When the house becomes clogged or torn, the lavacean simply leaves it and builds another. But the discarded houses remain, and over time, they drift and accumulate, forming clusters of ghostly architecture. Entire fields of these transparent domes exist in some parts of the ocean, slowly decaying and collapsing like ruins left behind by a forgotten civilization. Divers have compared them to cathedrals, alien nests, jelly palaces lost in time. And inside them, sometimes, there are visitors, amphipods, worms, even tiny cephalopods, taking shelter in structures never meant for them. No one knows what guides the lavacean's design. There is no central brain, no complex nervous system, and yet the geometry is precise, efficient, repeating across generations, a language of shapes passed down in mucus and instinct. And then there are the benthic sea cucumbers, also called sea pigs. At first glance, they are almost comical, soft-bodied, pink and stumpy, with tube feet that resemble legs. But they move in groups, hundreds at a time, migrating across the seafloor in slow processions, feeding on the organic dust of the deep. When one moves, others follow. No eyes, no leaders, no sound, just movement, like a thought spreading across a body that isn't aware it has limbs. In 2009, a research drone observed a group of over 500 sea pigs move in synchronized lines for more than 14 hours, across terrain with no food source, no obvious destination. And at the end of their journey, they stopped in a loose circle and remained still. For days, some called it random, others saw a pattern. In ancient mythology, creatures that moved in silence and circles were often seen as ritualistic. Perhaps this is just projection, or perhaps the rituals of the deep are not for us to understand. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't a monster, it's the sense that something vast and ancient has a reason for moving, and you're just not capable of knowing what it is. But even in the darkest waters, light still flickers, because not everything that moves in the deep does so to feed or build. Some creatures perform. Take the Atolla jellyfish. When attacked, this creature doesn't retreat. Instead, it flashes in a brilliant spiral of blue bioluminescence, a rotating, pulsing burst of light, so bright that it startles predators and lures in larger ones. The Atola signals not for help, but for chaos. It calls down violence in exchange for escape. A trade it has perfected. It does not resist. It redirects. And the deeper you go, the more creatures you find who have evolved not to survive by fighting, but by controlling the story told around them. And then we come to one of the most haunting of all, what's been unofficially called the glass crawler, observed only once, in 2013, during a Mariana Trench descent. The footage was damaged, the lighting poor, but the creature was clear, a segmented body, nearly translucent, with a skin that shimmered like oil and bent light around itself. It moved along the seafloor with legs that were far too long for its body, folding and extending like a mechanical spider made of jelly. Its head, or what seemed to be its front, was smooth. No mouth, no eyes, but the way it angled toward the submersible gave the strong impression of being watched. Its movements were not like anything biological. They were measured, like something mimicking locomotion, like a shape wearing the idea of an animal. The video cut out seconds later. The submersible was recovered without damage, but the memory module containing the full footage had been corrupted, physically melted from within. A chemical reaction had occurred, apparently triggered by pressure, but the dive wasn't anywhere near crush depth, and the damage was isolated to the chip. Nothing else was affected. Some believe the glass crawler isn't real, just a glitch, a trick of light, but the pilot who saw it refused to dive again. In his official report, he wrote something simple but chilling. It knew I saw it, and it let me leave. In the deep, we expect stillness. We believe that darkness should be still. But the truth is, the ocean floor is alive in a way we cannot comprehend. It doesn't move fast, it doesn't roar, but it moves, in patterns, in pulses, in slow drifts and sudden shifts. There are things that should be dead, but aren't. Things that should be buried, but rise, and things that were never alive in the first place, but imitate life anyway, waiting for something to look their way. Because down here, movement is not an accident, it's an invitation.
Part 5. They drift in silence because they can afford to imagine sinking into a part of the ocean so deep that no storm, no current, no human-built vessel has ever truly passed through it. Down here, below 7 miles of water, time doesn't pass in hours. It unfolds in silence. Creatures do not move because they are in a hurry. They move because they are certain. Because when the water is still, and the light has died, and the pressure is so high that molecules themselves are altered by it, only those who've mastered waiting can afford to roam. And some of them don't look like animals at all. The blob sculpin, for example, is one of the most unassuming deep-sea fish ever discovered. Its face droops, its body sags, it floats just above the ocean floor, unmoving, like a pile of discarded flesh. But it is not dead, it is watching. For hours, days even, the blob sculpin will remain in the same position, hovering over its own cluster of eggs, guarding them with the kind of stillness that seems more spiritual than instinctive. Other fish abandon their offspring to the currents, but the blob sculpin waits, not out of affection. There is no room for sentiment here, but out of knowledge. It has learned that in the deep, patience is not a virtue, it is a weapon. Then there's the ghost shark, also called the chimere. Related more closely to sharks and rays than to bony fish, the ghost shark is covered in pale, glistening skin, its fins wide and fluttering like fabric, but its eyes, those enormous green reflective discs, are what unsettle the most. Not because they're threatening, but because they are too open, too large, as if the creature exists solely to receive impressions from the world, not to interact with it. And perhaps that's true. Ghost sharks don't chase, they don't ambush, they glide along the seafloor as if collecting whispers, and when disturbed, they vanish into the black like a thought you didn't want to think anymore. But even stranger are the comb jellies, creatures that resemble jellyfish, but are far older in evolutionary history. They float with rows of tiny cilia along their sides, which refract and scatter light into shimmering rainbows. Not bioluminescence, but true diffraction. They are like chandeliers adrift in a sunken ballroom. Most comb jellies are harmless plankton eaters, but in the deep, there are larger ones that drift through trenches and undersea valleys, wide-mouthed and transparent, pulsing softly in long waves. They do not sting, they envelop. Their prey does not realize what is happening until it is already inside. And there are stories, unconfirmed, unrecorded, but told in whispers of comb jellies caught in nets at depths of 5,000 meters that stretched beyond the boat. Fragile, yes, but endless. Their bodies collapsed when pulled to the surface, reducing to water and broken tissue within minutes. But before they did, they revealed something no one had expected. Embedded within the jelly were tiny shapes. Not bones, not organs, but structures. Some likened them to seeds, others to cysts. One diver, after helping recover the net, simply said, "It wasn't fishing, it was harvesting." No samples survived. Now picture the deep-sea lizardfish. It has a long, narrow body and a mouth filled with translucent fangs. But its most terrifying feature isn't its teeth. It's that it doesn't blink. Its eyes are permanently open, wide and glassy, reflecting the faintest bioluminescence. It swims slowly, mouth slightly agape, scanning for motion. Not color, not shape, just movement. Anything that moves in front of it is attacked, but not randomly. With speed, precision, and silence. Lizardfish have been known to consume prey almost their own size, then sink to the seafloor for days, unmoving, while they digest. To swim past one is to feel like you are already inside its memory, and there are others still, less known, less categorized. Divers who have worked with deep ROVs tell of inverted organisms, creatures that appear normal at first, but whose internal organs seem to float above their bodies, connected by tendrils of gelatinous matter. Some move in spirals, others in slow ascending lines. One described a creature like a jellyfish wearing its skeleton outside, like a lantern with ribs. These sightings often come just before equipment fails, power drains, lights flicker, as if the very presence of these entities warps something, not physically but fundamentally. The scariest thing about the deep sea is not just what we find, it's what seems to know we're watching. On several occasions, deep-sea recording devices have picked up rhythmic pulses, too slow to be machinery, too regular to be natural. The pulses begin when the probe descends. They stop when it's removed. At first, scientists thought these were due to mechanical resonance. But then it happened again, with new devices, different oceans, different years, same pulse, same pattern. And once, just once, the pulses ended with something else. A silence so complete the hydrophones recorded zero signal for 12 seconds, not ambient noise, not quiet, zero, as if the water itself had ceased to exist. The term used by the technicians was black void. They couldn't explain it, and they haven't encountered it since. But in every lab where deep ocean acoustics are studied, there's a kind of superstition. If your data goes completely silent, don't celebrate. Don't assume the equipment's broken. Sometimes the silence is the message. And all of this, all these creatures, these drifting, watching, waiting beings, share one trait. They do not rush, they do not panic, because down here, movement isn't about getting somewhere, it's about endurance. They move in centuries, in slow hunts that might take months, in dances of phosphorescence, older than the continents. And that slowness, that grace, it isn't weakness, it's confidence. Because nothing down here is afraid of you. They drift in silence, because they can afford to. Part 6. Faces that were never meant to be seen in the deep sea. There are creatures with faces, not in the human sense, but in the eerie, visceral way a mind interprets familiarity, where it shouldn't exist. Faces that look like expressions frozen in the wrong moment. Mouths that don't close, eyes that bulge too far, skin stretched too thin across bone or cartilage. Or something worse. These faces are not made for light. They are shaped by pressure and time, carved by a darkness so absolute that biology must feel its way into function. And when light does touch them, artificial, pale, from submersibles or floodlights, they appear not grateful, but insulted, as if you've forced something into visibility that should have remained hidden. One of the most infamous is the frilled shark, often called a living fossil, not because it looks old, but because it carries the anatomy of something ancient and unfinished. Its mouth opens vertically, like a zipper splitting up the center. Inside are rows upon rows of trident-shaped teeth, hooked inward, designed not to kill swiftly, but to ensure nothing escapes once taken. It swims with slow serpentine movements, eel-like, its long body wrapped in folds of skin. Its eyes reflect a dull, muddy glint, too small for its face, too calm for its design. And when it opens its jaws, it doesn't snap or bite. It unhinges, like a trapdoor opening in a dream. Then there's the goblin shark, pink-skinned, slow-moving, with a nose like a blade and jaws that shoot forward in a slingshot motion to seize prey. Most sharks rely on speed or stealth. The goblin shark relies on precision. Its jaws extend a third of the way out from its head, striking in a sudden blur and retracting again just as quickly. To watch it feed is to see a face transform, twist, extend, become something else entirely for just a second, before folding back into a shape that was never meant to be stable. Some scientists describe its jaw mechanics as prehensile. Others prefer the term weaponized bone. It is quite literally a face that attacks, but there are worse. The bearded sea devil, a kind of anglerfish, is rarely seen alive. The females, massive compared to the males, float with a lure extended from their heads, tipped with glowing bacteria that pulse with cold chemical light. Below the lure is a face split open with curved teeth, translucent and always visible. But the horror of the sea devil isn't its lure or its teeth, it's what happens when a male finds it. The male, tiny, blind and defenseless, bites the female and never lets go. Over time his body fuses with hers. His eyes dissolve, his brain dies, his organs rot away. He becomes part of her body, providing sperm in exchange for survival. And sometimes more than one male fuses. A cluster of mouths, permanently latched to a single drifting female, who no longer swims, just floats, waiting with a face of still hunger and flesh that was never meant to share. Even deeper, we find creatures without clear form, like the coldrake jellyfish, a rare species filmed only once near the Kermadec Trench. Its bell glowed red, lined with pale white spots that pulsed in sequence. From the bell hung not tentacles, but a central stalk, a thick muscular appendage that extended down and ended in an orifice. Not a mouth, not a vent, something in between. And when it opened there was nothing inside, no light, just absence. The jellyfish didn't use this structure to feed or move. It simply kept it open as it drifted, as if inviting something. And when a small fish passed through it, yes, through, because that's what happened, the stalk sealed shut like a mouth closing around an idea. The fish never emerged. Scientists who reviewed the footage argued about whether it was predation or a form of filter feeding. But one biologist, quiet, serious, not prone to speculation, simply said, it wasn't eating, it was accepting. Not all faces in the deep are part of a head. The scottoplanes, commonly known as sea pigs, have their mouth on the underside of their body, but above them, along the top, are two odd swollen structures, thought at first to be gills, but some scans suggest they react to motion, not touch, not pressure, just presence. One theory proposes these lobes are tuned to bioelectric fields, the weak pulses living organisms emit. Like nerves without a brain, they reach out, not to understand you but to feel that you exist. And if you've ever looked at a creature and felt as though it knew something you didn't, that's what you'd feel watching a sea pig move. Slowly, unbothered, certain. Because in the deep, awareness doesn't need language. Sometimes it just needs skin. There's also the mirror fish, a deep living species with reflective scales, so perfect they bounce back almost all light. But what's disturbing isn't the shine, it's the lack of detail. When you look at one you see only the distortion of yourself, your lights, your sub, your own outline, bouncing off a body that refuses to be seen as itself. It mimics everything, not because it wants to hide, but because it refuses to be defined. A reflection, a decoy, a silence pretending to be a shape. One researcher joked that it's the fish version of a mask. Another, less humorously, noted that predators never seem to take them. And maybe that's because predators too hesitate when they see themselves looking back. But the most haunting of all may be the faceless cusk eel, rediscovered during a trench survey in 2017. When pulled to the surface, it looked like a melted ghost. No visible eyes, no clear mouth, just a body tapering to a gelatinous fin. But closer examination revealed that its face wasn't missing. It had simply retreated inward. The bones had collapsed, the features folded under translucent skin. You could still see the hint of a mouth, turned inward like a wound that never opened fully. Some animals avoid light. This one seemed to reject it. Its organs were still alive, pulsing faintly under its skin, but its face was gone, removed, not with violence, with time, Faces in the deep aren't for communication. They don't smile. They don't warn. They exist only as tools, parts of machines designed to sense, trap, dissolve. And when we shine our lights on them, they don't flinch, because they don't care how we see them. They were never meant to be seen at all.
Part 7. The hunger that waits without form. In the deepest parts of the ocean, beyond what even the boldest machines can comfortably navigate, there are regions not just unexplored but unimaginable. Places where pressure doesn't merely crush, it reshapes. Where matter dissolves, not because of temperature, but because the weight of the world above is simply too much for flesh or metal, or thought. Down here, the idea of a creature becomes unstable. You begin to encounter things that don't seem alive in the ways we recognize. Things that don't swim or crawl or drift. They exist, quietly, completely, and their presence is only made known by absence, by what disappears around them. These are the beings we don't classify, not because we don't try, but because our language, our taxonomies, our biological frameworks weren't built to handle them. They don't have spines, or eyes, or even symmetry. Some don't have cells in the traditional sense, but we've found them, on accident, always, on sonar, in corrupted footage, in the disrupted paths of animals that vanish without a trace, and sometimes in the things that wash up, hollowed, not eaten. Consider the case of the D47 anomaly, recorded during a multi-agency trench probe in the Philippine Sea. The autonomous crawler they deployed reached a shelf 10,400 meters deep, where it began recording flickers of movement just beyond its visual range. Infrared cameras caught undulating motions, slow, rhythmic, without propulsion, but they weren't coming from a creature. They were part of the water itself, pressure waves folding and unfolding in place, as if something massive but entirely fluid was changing shape in total silence. No body, no heat signature, just disturbance. Then the feed cut to black, not glitch, not static, just black. When the crawler surfaced days later, its metal plating had warped, not broken, but bowed inward, as though something had pressed around it without touching it. The crawl logs showed no collision, no contact, only one final log entry before the blackout. Signal inversion registered, buoyancy reduced, returning, signal inversion, as if the water itself had started listening back. We've known for decades that organic matter in the deep decomposes differently. Bones last longer, flesh does not rot but dissolves, and in some regions known as black zones, entire whale falls disappear in a fraction of the time expected. Scavengers won't approach. Worms that normally swarm such feasts are absent. The seabed looks untouched, but core samples show otherwise. A strange viscosity in the silt, a presence that leaves no residue, only absence, as if something feeds without interacting. There are deep-sea creatures we call gelatinous forms, like the deep pelagic tunicates, which drift through the water as translucent sacs. Most are harmless, filter feeders, but one rare species, never recovered intact, has earned an informal nickname among researchers, the unmouth. In 2003, a probe off the Kermadec Trench recorded footage of something vast and flexible, shaped like an enormous spiral, rotating slowly with its outer membrane rippling. Within its center was a void, not a mouth, not an opening, just a region of anti-light, where all reflections vanished. Several small fish drifted too close. They did not flee, they simply slowed, curved, and vanished into the spiral. No struggle, no reaction. They were taken, without violence. Some scientists believe this was a feeding event, others suspect a reproductive act, but a third group, quietly, suggests neither, that perhaps what we saw was a form of consumption not yet understood. Not energy conversion, not digestion, just erasure. Erasure isn't something we usually associate with biology, but in the deep, biology doesn't follow our expectations. The sea holothurian, a cousin to sea cucumbers, demonstrates this well. Most are slow, worm-like creatures, but some species have been observed releasing their internal organs into the water on purpose. Not as a defense mechanism, not as a mistake. They eject lungs, intestines, reproductive sacs, and then absorb them again hours later. Why? We're not sure. Perhaps to cleanse, perhaps to change form, perhaps as a ritual. Some think it's an evolutionary adaptation for survival. Others think it's evidence of a fluid identity, organisms that rewrite themselves over and over, depending on what's needed. When your home is a trench that hasn't changed in 100 million years,
adaptation might become something more like morphing. It's not hard to imagine this process taken further. What if there were creatures down there with no fixed shape at all? What if self was optional? Enter the whispers about Entity 15 Bulb, an unverified but oft-cited phenomenon, reported by a series of independent bathypelagic monitoring stations over the last decade. The entity is never seen, only inferred by rapid simultaneous drops in pressure, followed by sudden flashes of bioluminescence in organized patterns. These flashes don't resemble fish, jellyfish, or cephalopods. They resemble maps, sequences, arrays of blinking light over kilometers of ocean, then nothing, as if something was trying to display data. But through the medium of light and water, one station captured the pattern. When reconstructed, it formed a complex shape, a spiral wrapped around a sphere, intersected by a line. Mathematicians noticed the geometry matched a specific kind of three-dimensional fold, called a calibre manifold, used in string theory to describe extra dimensions. Biologists say that's a coincidence, but physicists stop talking about it. There are animals in the deep that pulse not to lure prey, but to signal, to respond to us. And if that's the case, then it's not just hunger that lives down there. It's awareness, not like ours, not with language or tools or civilizations. Something older, something that does not speak but waits, and feeds, when it must, without anger, without cruelty, just certainty. And so we send our machines, we shine our lights, we record what we can, frame by frame. But for every creature we identify, there are 100 we only disturb briefly, who drift back into blackness, and leave behind no skeleton, no body, no trace, just that feeling, that something else moved, and that it chose not to stay. Part 8. The shadows that break the silence. There's a rule among oceanographers, unspoken but understood. If you stare into the deep long enough, it will stare back, not literally, not with eyes or expressions, but with events unexplained, subtle, wrong in the way that only truly alien things can be. There are moments when the ocean doesn't feel like an ecosystem, or a collection of life and current. It feels like something else entirely, something watching you through the stillness, something that was never meant to be measured, but endures measurement with eerie patience, and every now and then, it answers. In 2019, a deep-sea drone operated by a European research vessel sent back footage from near the Kermadec Trench, around 10,800 meters deep. The team was studying benthic lifeforms when the camera picked up something strange, a region of motionless water, not dead water, not sediment cloud, frozen. The water in a circular radius roughly 3 meters across was not flowing, not undulating, not vibrating at all, as though time had paused inside it. The drone's lights passed through this patch, and the beams bent. The light didn't scatter. It curved, warping around something that wasn't there. The drone attempted to move closer. Its systems shut down, power dropped, sensors failed. Emergency recall was triggered. It surfaced within 20 minutes, unharmed. But every time its storage attempted to play back that footage, the video showed only black. Audio remained. 20 minutes of soft humming. A rhythmic, low-pitched vibration that wasn't mechanical, that wasn't human. Some described it as breathing. Not long after, similar anomalies were recorded in the Java Trench and near the southern edge of the Puerto Rico Trench. Always the same profile. Water that should move but doesn't, light that should disperse but folds inward, and a sound, not carried through equipment, but emitted from within. A sound that makes the hairs on your neck rise even through a speaker. Scientists called these null zones. Off the record, some call them listening pools, because when you send something in, the ocean listens, and sometimes it responds. Then there's the black dragonfish, which embodies the deep's cruel indifference with elegance. Its body is long, lean and oily, glistening with photophores, light-producing cells that run down its sides. It uses this light to lure prey in total darkness, flashing just enough to mimic smaller fish. But what terrifies researchers is its face. It has transparent skin across its head. Beneath you can see every nerve twitch, every contraction. Its jaw can unhinge to nearly twice the width of its skull, and its teeth, thin as needles, are made of a substance called nanocrystalline hydroxyapatite, invisible in water. So not only does the dragonfish glow, its teeth do not reflect light. Its bite is literally unseen. It can open its mouth and swallow you, and you'd never see it coming. And it gets stranger. In 2005, A dive team near the Tonga Trench encountered what they thought was a drifting whale carcass. But when they approached, the body began to rise. Not float, rise vertically without rotation or current. As though lifted, the team's ROV tilted to follow it. At the halfway point, the carcass suddenly accelerated upward and vanished into the darkness. No sound, no debris, just gone. Later scans found no whales in the region. No evidence of recent feeding. The ocean had taken something back that had already died, or perhaps it had never been dead to begin with. These stories accumulate like sediment, slow, steady, heavy with the weight of the unprovable. Sometimes, something real breaks through. In 2014, NOAA released hydrophone data of a series of sounds recorded in the Mariana Trench. Low-frequency pulses, evenly spaced, initially believed to be geological, until the patterns changed. The intervals shortened, then lengthened again, a rhythm rising and falling, repeating every 32 hours for 11 days. Then silence. A year later, a similar pulse was recorded 3,000 kilometers away. The same signature, same rise and fall. Only this time, it ended in something new. A final click, sharp, precise. The kind of click a dolphin makes. If the dolphin were 40 meters long and made of steel, it wasn't sonar, it wasn't geological, and it's never been heard again. But it's not just sound. Visual phenomena have increased over the last decade. Recordings of deep-sea lights that don't match any known organism. Not bioluminescence, but illumination. Shapes of glowing geometry, squares, rings, spirals that slowly expand and fade. They don't move like jellyfish or siphonophores. They hold still, or rotate, as if projecting something. Once, an ROV approached a spiral of blue light. When it passed through the center, every onboard compass spun simultaneously, despite being digital. Gyroscopes failed, lights flickered. The video survived, but the drone's drive system had to be rebuilt. Engineers found microscopic metal fatigue in the thrusters, patterns that would normally take decades to appear. The drone had been in the water 2 days. One of the most disquieting sightings remains classified, but leaked by a researcher in 2020. A brief clip, apparently recovered from a deep probe off the Chilean coast, shows a dark structure rising from the seafloor. Not a creature, not a rock, something in between. It looked carved, like stone, but moved like muscle. As the ROV illuminated it, the surface shimmered, revealing rows of parallel lines, not natural, symmetrical. The drone froze, and then slowly, the structure began to sink, as if melting, back into the ground, not vanishing, just choosing not to remain. No one knows what it was. Some refuse to believe it existed, but the people who saw it don't forget. They describe it the same way. It looked like it was never supposed to be found. And maybe that's the truth of the deep. We think of the ocean as a place to explore, to conquer, but we are late arrivals, tourists, looking down into a house we do not own. And the things that live there, the ones without names or nerves or symmetry, they're not hostile, they're just waiting, because they can afford to, because time is theirs, because this planet was never just ours.
Part 9. They were here before light, before there were continents, before forests clawed their way across land or stars were named by human tongues. There was ocean, not the ocean we sail and study today, not the shallow blue skin stretched over the Earth's surface, but something deeper, colder, wiser, an unbroken silence draped in darkness, breathing slow tides beneath the crust of time itself. In that blackness, life did not spark. It persisted, it waited, and what still dwells there now has not forgotten the world before sunlight. Some scientists believe that hydrothermal vent communities were the origin of all life on Earth, that in the crushing black near volcanic fissures, where boiling water met freezing abyss, cells first fused, split, and began the slow climb toward complexity. The riftier tubeworms that thrive around these vents are relics of that age. They don't eat, they don't see, they survive entirely through chemosynthesis. Bacteria within their tissues convert hydrogen sulfide into energy. They grow up to 10 feet long, clustered in colonies, swaying in hot currents, their plumes like scarlet flags marking some forgotten territory. And around them live things that haven't changed in hundreds of millions of years. Pale shrimp, limpets, vent crabs, creatures that live without the sun, and perhaps without time.
But even these are familiar compared to what exists below them, because there are vents that no man has visited, trenches that no sonar has mapped in detail, and within those creases of the earth, there are forms that defy memory, creatures with lineages so old, they predate extinction itself, not evolved, not adapted, just endured. The kind of life that doesn't fight to survive, because it never imagined death as a possibility. Off the coast of Antarctica, beneath the Ross Ice Shelf, researchers drilled through nearly 900 meters of ice to study water flow. When their camera reached the ocean cavity below, something passed in front of it, slow, rippling, and segmented. At first it was believed to be a worm or eel, but as they rewound the footage, something became clear. It wasn't swimming, it was floating in place. Its body was motionless. The current passed through it, and its segments suddenly shifted in sequence, like a jellyfish blooming in reverse. It had no eyes, no organs visible, just motion. When the team analyzed the footage frame by frame, they realized the creature had no discernible entry or exit point. It was a loop, a closed system, a body that began where it ended. One of the researchers simply said, "It looked like it didn't evolve, it remained." These are not just strange animals. These are reminders. The amphipods found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench have armor laced with aluminum extracted from sighting regularly. Then without warning it stopped, not because it failed, because it was still transmitting. But the signal returned blank, as if the probe still existed, still functioned, but the space around it had erased all interaction. Then just as suddenly, contact returned. The probe had moved laterally, 20 kilometers in seconds. No explanation, no turbulence, just displacement. It came back intact, covered in scratches that didn't match any known animal, mineral, or mechanical pattern. Narrow, arched, repeating. When asked what might have caused it, the lead investigator shrugged. "We didn't find something down there," he said. "Something found us." The deeper you go, the older the rules become. The deep sea doesn't obey gravity the same way. It doesn't reflect light. It doesn't echo. Down here things have learned to live without sound, without shape, without identity. And that's what makes them terrifying. Not because they're monsters, but because they don't need to be anything you can define. They are shadows cast by an earth we no longer remember. They were here before light, and they'll still be here when the light goes out. Heart 10. The deep doesn't forget what we bury. The ocean swallows everything eventually. Ships, bones, machines, secrets. It is the great undoing, not through rage or malice, but through time, through weight, through patience. But what few people realize is that sometimes, the deep doesn't keep what it swallows. Sometimes, it gives it back, altered, stripped, whispering, and not always when we expect it. In 2001, a deep-sea mining operation in the Central Pacific recovered what they believed to be a sunken piece of equipment, a pressure-resistant casing, similar to those used in early Cold War submarine surveillance. But when they pulled it up, something was wrong. The exterior was warped, not from crush pressure, but from internal heat. And the material, originally titanium alloy, had been restructured, its crystal lattice changed. Metallurgists ran tests. The patterns they found shouldn't have been possible outside of a lab. No current, no bacteria, no natural process should have done that. And inside the casing, where there should have been machinery or wiring, there was only black silt and something harder embedded in the center. A fragment of bone, human, but burned from the inside out. No name, no records, just the slow return of something that should have been forgotten. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. There are regions of the sea where wreckage returns wrong. In 2014, a fishing vessel found a section of aeroplane fuselage drifting near the Sunda Trench. The markings were nearly gone, the metal bleached white. When hauled onto the ship, the crew found the inner surface lined with a thin, sticky film. Analysis showed it wasn't organic, not bacterial, it was silicon-based, not alive, but arranged. A repeating pattern, fractal, recursive. Engineers called it cold circuitry. They didn't know what it meant. They still don't. The section was removed by officials 2 days later. No public report ever released. These are not stories about ghosts, they're stories about echoes. The sea holds on to memory differently than land. When a city crumbles, we dig through rubble. When a forest burns, it regrows. But when the ocean claims something, it often disappears entirely, until it doesn't. And what comes back is never intact. It's reconfigured, as if the sea isn't just dissolving matter, it's processing it. Take the story of the abyssal bell. In the early 1990s, sonar teams working near the Peru-Chile Trench recorded a strange anomaly, a series of pings bouncing back in a triangular pattern. At thought it was an error, maybe a cave or rock formation, but the pattern repeated, identical each time, perfect angles, even timing. Eventually, a team sent a drone to investigate. What it found was a vast depression in the ocean floor, shaped like a bell, wider at the top, narrowing to a sharp cone. Around it, the ground was bare, no sediment, no life, just concentric rings etched into the stone, as if something had resonated there. The drone's instruments began to pick up a deep hum, not mechanical, not natural, a tone, pure and low. The longer the drone remained, the stronger the signal became, until the camera began to glitch. The last footage shows something moving in the pit, not rising, not swimming, unfolding, as if space itself were being peeled back. Then static. The drone was recovered, but its hard drive was magnetized beyond repair, not wiped, rewritten, scrambled with a pulse signature that matched no known transmission. To this day, they don't know what caused the resonance, or if it ended. Some believe it's not just ships and bodies that the ocean remembers. Some believe it holds the memory of ideas. In 2008, divers exploring a trench shelf off the Azores encountered a carved structure, large stone slabs stacked in geometric fashion, half buried in silt, covered in strange angular markings. It resembled no known ruin, and more disturbingly, some of the markings were found inside the stone, like veins of pigment that had grown through solid rock. When scanned with LiDAR, the markings formed a repeating glyph, three-dimensional, like an impossible cube, that could only exist from one viewing angle. And that glyph matched a symbol found etched into the side of a failed deep-sea submersible, recovered in the 1970s. A sub whose pilot died mid-descent. Autopsy said heart failure. But no stress markers, no panic, just stillness. The symbol on the sub was dismissed as a scratch, until the ruins beneath the Azores. So what does that mean? Maybe the ocean isn't haunted. Maybe it isn't hiding monsters. Maybe it's remembering, not the way we remember with photographs or graves or maps, but with form, with distortion, with corruption, taking what we give it, metal, sound, death, thought, and feeding it to something old, something slow. And when it returns it to us, it's not out of mercy. It's a message, look what you've left behind. And sometimes what comes back is alive. The barrelly fish has a transparent head. Its eyes float inside, like green spheres, rotating freely in fluid. It stares upward, through its own skull, hunting for prey. But it has a secondary set of lenses, internal ones that see behind it. No other vertebrate has this feature. It's evolved to watch what follows, what chases, what may rise from below. Its entire body is a warning in the deep. What you see isn't what's coming. What's coming is what you missed. In 2011, a survey drone detected a shadow below it. A long, unbroken silhouette. No movement, just presence. The drone turned to descend, but the shadow didn't stay still. It widened. No eyes, no mouth, just blackness, spreading. The drone rose, the shadow rose with it, until it hit a thermal layer and vanished, gone, as if it had never existed. But when the drone reached the surface, its cameras were fine, its systems were normal, only the hull had changed. The paint, heat-resistant, pressure-tolerant, had melted away, in perfect lines, circular, like a fingerprint, only too large, too smooth, not human. The sea gives back many things, bones, wrecks, signals, stories, but most often, what it gives back is a question, and it's always the same one. Do you really think this was ever gone?
Part 11. Where the current ends but nothing rests in the architecture of the ocean. Currents are the lifeblood. They feed coral, they guide migration, they stir nutrients from the abyss to the surface, and return the fallen back into the dark. But not everywhere. There are places, hidden deep below the zones of turbulence and thermal exchange, where nothing moves. Not because the water is still, but because the laws of motion fail. Places where a drifting object will stop without cause, where light dims faster than it should, where even sound seems reluctant to pass. These are the places oceanographers refer to in whispers as the null pockets, though the name is unofficial, unmapped, and deliberately excluded from public logs. One of the first known incidents occurred in 1996, when a Japanese submersible, exploring an unmapped ledge in the Izu Bonin Trench, entered what it described as a static corridor. The sub's operator, a seasoned deep-sea technician, reported that the vehicle's vertical descent halted despite no change in propulsion or buoyancy. Instruments showed they were still sinking. Visuals confirmed they were not. The view outside the sub didn't fade. It simply stopped updating. The lights hit something that wasn't a surface, but also wasn't distance. The descent was aborted. When they ascended and returned to port, the black box showed 4 minutes of total sensor loss. Not failure, loss. The ocean stopped responding. The footage from that dive was never released, but fragments leaked later revealed that when the sub's light bank flickered on low battery, it briefly revealed shapes, not objects. Contours, massive, slow-curving ridges, almost organic, but too symmetrical, too spaced, like ribs, like the architecture of something once beating. The ocean is not flat. It is not a bowl or a tank. It is a labyrinth of folds and hollows and blind alleys. It has dead ends, and some of those ends are not empty. Consider the deep pelagic bristleworm, a species that rarely surfaces in footage because it cannot survive even minor shifts in pressure. These worms have no eyes, no recognizable organs. They exist as bands of translucent muscle, with dense hairs used to detect flow and motion. But one specimen, recovered accidentally by a Russian trawler in the Sea of Okhotsk, bore something no other bristleworm had embedded in its membrane, with 3 perfect circles, dark rubbery nodes aligned down its spine. Initially believed to be parasites, closer inspection revealed that they were open, not feeding, listening. Tonal resonance scans showed that each node emitted a hum in slightly different frequency bands. No known biological function matched the pattern, and when played back through sonar at matching frequencies, every tank in the lab began to vibrate. 3 days later, every bristleworm in containment died simultaneously. No cause, no reaction. They simply stopped, as if someone had flipped a switch they didn't know existed. This isn't about supernatural horror, it's about design. There are species in the deep that reflect evolution, and then there are those that suggest intention, not by a god, not by man, by something else. Something that didn't need to build tools or language. Something that remembers the ocean not as a home but as a body. In 2018, during a hydroacoustic survey off the coast of Madagascar, a research vessel detected a submerged object, approximately 2 kilometers in length, shaped like a crescent. It wasn't rising, it wasn't moving, but its acoustic signature was repeating. Every 5 minutes, a pulse, not strong enough to be sonar, not soft enough to be natural. When the vessel moved closer, the pulse shifted by exactly 11 milliseconds. Not random, reactive. They sent an unmanned probe. The probe failed at 1,200 meters. Not catastrophically, it simply stopped transmitting. 2 hours later, it surfaced on its own. Its onboard memory had been wiped, manually. Only one fragment remained, a still image, blurred and corrupted. But in the center of that image, if enhanced, was a shape, a curvature, familiar, resembling the same crescent structure from sonar. Only now, in the photo, it was open. It's like a shell unfolding, like a door, and beyond it, darkness. Not black water, not void, something darker than void. Perhaps the most terrifying creature recovered from the depths isn't the largest or the most violent, but the one that shouldn't have survived, the deep mirror octopus, found only once 7,000 meters down, near the trench wall in the South Sandwich Islands. The creature had no chromatophores, no ability to change color, but it had something else, skin composed of reflective cells, like layers of ultra-thin glass. It reflected not only light, but movement. When a light source flickered in the sub, the octopus flickered too, matching the pattern in reverse, like it wasn't reflecting, like it was predicting. And when it vanished, because that's the only way to describe what it didn't swim away. It folded, its limbs curled inward, its body inverted, and it wasn't there anymore. Not hidden. It swog about the ocean like it's passive, like it's a space we enter to study, to harvest,
to explore, but sometimes it seems less like an environment and more like a memory, something holding form as long as it needs to, then changing when it decides it no longer wants to be known. There are stories of submersibles lost not to failure, but to confusion, of lights that vanish behind silt that wasn't there, of shadows that move in grids, of trench walls that hum, not from vents, not from motion, but from intention. Where the current ends, nothing rests. It waits, it remembers what it swallowed, and it decides on its own time whether to keep it. Part 12. The places that shouldn't be cold. There are regions of the ocean where temperature stops making sense. Places where cold isn't just the absence of heat, but a presence in itself, dense, deliberate, and suffocating. You can find them in every ocean basin, tucked behind ridges, nestled in collapsed caverns, or pooling in ancient depressions that haven't seen surface contact in millions of years. In these places, instruments don't fail, but they return values that scientists file away quietly, under phrases like local anomaly or extreme thermocline deviation, because what they record is not just colder than expected, it is colder than should be possible, beyond the reach of known physics, as if something else is pulling the warmth out of the water, not dispersing it, but feeding on it. In 2004, a dive team exploring the South Sandwich Trench deployed a probe into a suspected methane seep. What they found instead was a cavern-like shelf hidden beneath a layer of loose sediment, stretching nearly 600 meters in length. When the probe entered the chamber, all external thermometers began reporting a rapid drop, not a gradual cooling, a sudden linear plummet. Temperature fell 7 degrees Celsius in less than 10 seconds. Lights began to dim. The probe's battery, designed for 40 hours of operation, depleted within 16 minutes. What returned to the surface was a hull lined with frost, not from ambient freezing, but from internal condensation. The probe had been chilled from the inside, like something extracted its heat through the casing, and in its camera logs, the last 10 seconds were unreadable. Corrupted, not by impact, but by overcompression of the data, like the digital signal had been physically squeezed. This wasn't an isolated case. 2 years later, a deep survey beneath the Sulu Sea located what they believed to be an extinct hydrothermal vent, but when the surrounding water was analyzed, it exhibited inverted thermocline behavior, meaning the deeper the probe went, the colder it got. At 6,000 meters, the sensors would soar -2.1 degrees Celsius, below the freezing point of seawater. But it wasn't freezing, there was no ice, just dark, unmoving liquid, thick with particulate matter, and a faint persistent hum, barely above the threshold of perception. Divers never went down. The project ended 6 days later, citing budget exhaustion, but internal memos referenced something stranger. Pressure readings didn't match the ocean's profile, as if the water itself wasn't pressing downward, but something beneath it was pulling up. Creatures in these zones don't act like others. They don't scatter from lights. They don't react to sound. The blackfin sleeper shark, discovered near a glacial brine pool in the Arctic Ocean, didn't swim, just spotted without propulsion. When researchers brought it aboard, it was alive, heartbeat slow but steady. Its flesh was frigid, colder than the surrounding water, yet somehow still soft, still flowing with blood. Inside its stomach were the remains of a squid species not known to science, with cartilage unlike any other cephalopod, twisted in a corkscrew pattern, coiled around nothing. When dissected, its internal cavity was empty. No digestive tract, no organs, just membrane. One biologist described it as a mouth that never became anything else. The cold in these places feels intelligent. It targets, it lingers, it waits. There are accounts from submersible pilots who report sudden fogging inside their sealed cabins, despite full environmental control. Breath that condenses in still air, screens that lag without mechanical reason. One described it as being noticed by a place. Another, war shaken, wrote in their log, wasn't the dark that scared me, it was the cold, not because I felt it, but because I knew something else needed it. Certain jellyfish, specifically, those within the genus Stygia medusa, have only been observed in these colder than freezing zones. Their bodies span meters in diameter, with 4 arms longer than a man's height, trailing behind them like dripping banners. But these jellyfish don't pulse, they don't swim, they hang, unmoving, suspended in the freeze. Occasionally, one will twist in on itself, contracting not inward but sideways, its tissues folding like cloth, pulled through a ring. Some believe this is how they move, others think it's a form of camouflage, mimicking something the ocean no longer wants us to see. Most chilling are the reports of cold echoes. These aren't sounds but sudden bursts of freezing water that appear in thermocline scans, waves of cold that ripple outward from a fixed point, traveling faster than they should, with no source. The water in front of them chills before contact. The temperature behind returns to normal. It's as if something is passing through. Entwite. Not made of mass, but of absence. Not matter, but memory. What kind of creature would thrive in such places? What kind of biology evolves not just to endure cold, but to generate it? Some researchers quietly propose that these anomalies are the result of thermal siphons, organisms or mechanisms that extract energy not for survival, but for containment. That perhaps the cold is not their fuel, but their prison. That what we're observing isn't life, but insulation. And every time we lower a probe, we chip away at that seal. There's a phrase that's begun to appear in deep-sea research circles, never written in papers, always shared over drinks or during off-the-record interviews: the hush tide. It refers to a point, somewhere around 8,000 meters deep, where audio stops recording properly, where water loses its echo, where even the hum of the sub falls away, and all that remains is a silence so complete, it feels sculpted. Not silence as in no sound, silence as in someone else is already listening. We send our machines into these places because we can't help ourselves. We chase knowledge like heat in a cold room, desperate to find shape in a world that resists understanding. But some shapes are only visible in stillness. Some knowledge only speaks through subtraction. And in the places that shouldn't be cold, where nothing grows, where warmth dissolves and where our own instruments flicker with hesitation, we're beginning to hear something louder than noise. The deep doesn't need to scream, it just waits, quietly, patiently, and when the temperature drops just low enough, it answers in kind.
Part 13. What the ocean won't let surface. Not everything that enters the ocean is lost forever. Some things come back, scarred, reshaped, or half-remembered by the surface world. But there is another category entirely. Things that try to return and can't. Shipwrecks that rise in currents only to vanish again before recovery. Unidentified sonar contacts that breach toward the surface, then reverse their course in ways that defy both buoyancy and propulsion. Creatures, half captured by camera lenses, whose forms distort as they ascend, as if unraveling the closer they come to light. The deeper truth may not be that the ocean holds its secrets, but that it rejects their exposure. In 1983, a Soviet exploration rig operating in the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench detected an ascending anomaly at approximately 6,700 meters. It had no propellant trail, no thermal signature, yet rose steadily at 5 meters per second, faster than any known whale, faster than any submersible could safely ascend. As it passed the 4,000 meter mark, the sonar image began to break apart, not in pieces, but in pattern. What had appeared as a solid body became a cloud of erratic, overlapping shapes. The technicians thought the target had disintegrated, but when the object passed the 2,000 meter line, it reformed again whole, again singular. Only this time, it was smaller, narrower, the shape now curved, finned, with movements resembling a squid or ribbon eel. At 500 meters, the contact vanished completely. Hours later, a crew member on the deck of a nearby trawler reported seeing something breach just before dawn. No splash, no sound, just a shimmer in the air, as if the sea had shivered. Then silence. No debris was found. The sonar records were archived. The event was labeled an unresolved aquatic distortion. Decades later, the same region saw a pattern repeated during a Chinese deep-sea mining operation. An automated extraction unit broke free from its tether and began rising uncommanded. When the control team attempted to override the system, all inputs failed. At 900 meters, the unit began spinning, slowly at first, then violently, rotating on an axis that didn't match the currents. By the time it reached 400 meters, the cameras had fractured.
One still image was transmitted before feed termination. It showed a dark, translucent mass pressed against the lens, not flesh, not water, but pressure made visible, as if the ocean itself had reached out to pull the machine back down. Recovery attempts were made, but nothing was found. The sea had swallowed the device whole, not drifted away, not lost, denied. Creatures have been caught in this phenomenon too. In 1997, researchers near the Puerto Rico Trench managed to capture a live specimen of a rarely seen benthic octopod, a pale, elongated species with delicate arms and thin, curtain-like webbing. As it was brought to the surface in a pressurized tank, observers noted its behavior remained calm, but something changed above the thermocline. The creature began to lose cohesion, not physically, but behaviorally. Its arms retracted inward, curling into itself in unnatural spirals. Its skin flushed from pearl white to obsidian black, then to a shimmering silver. By the time it reached the surface, it had ceased movement. The tank's pressure was intact, the water temperature steady, but the creature was wrong. Its tissues, once supple and elastic, were now rigid. Its eyes, previously wide and active, were cloudy. The post-mortem revealed no trauma, no disease. But when the researchers performed a biopsy, the cells had changed structure. The DNA sequences had become unstable, as if the genetic code itself had tried to rewrite, or revert, to what they couldn't say. The ocean doesn't just preserve, it conditions, it alters, and for some organisms, perhaps for some things, removal from that condition is not just dangerous, it's lethal, or worse, it's revealing. There are stories, unverified, of divers encountering creatures that behave like they're trying to flee the surface. One account describes a translucent eel-like form seen coiled around a submersible's descent cable. It didn't attack, it didn't flee, it merely hovered, mouth agape, as if absorbing vibration. When the sub began to ascend, the creature followed, until it reached a certain depth. Then violently, it recoiled. Not from pressure, but from something else. The pilot said it was as if the water changed around them. Not in temperature or clarity, but in mood. That same diver, years later, would describe the sensation not as fear, but as shame, as if they had witnessed something sacred in a place that forbade memory. The deeper possibility is this: some of the ocean's inhabitants are not merely adapted to depth, they are defined by it. They do not tolerate the surface because the surface is not their domain, not physically, not conceptually. They exist in a state of deep identity, shaped entirely by darkness, weight, silence. They are what they are because the ocean allows them to be. And when we try to remove them from that context, when we attempt to drag them into our realm, they do not survive. Or worse, they change into something we cannot understand. What if these depths are not just dangerous, but territorial? Not in the way a predator marks its range, but in the way a vault holds what must never be opened. What if the surface world isn't merely ignorant of the deep, but forbidden from its true nature? The more we try to bring the deep into the light, the more it slips through our fingers, and sometimes, it slips back on purpose. Because not everything in the ocean was meant to be seen, and what rises might not stay what it was, or might reveal something about us we didn't expect to learn. The ocean has many faces. It reflects, it conceals, it carries. But some things, it simply will not let go. Not to preserve, not to protect, but to prevent. Because there are things down there, not just monsters, not just anomalies, that do not want to be known. And more terrifying still, they are not alone in that desire. The ocean itself agrees. Part 14. The ones that drift too deep. There's a haunting certainty among deep-sea researchers that the most terrifying creatures aren't the ones that hide in caves or dwell in black water, waiting. It's the ones that move. Slowly, silently, with no destination. Creatures that do not stalk or sleep, that do not hunt or hide. They just drift. Like a thought the ocean hasn't finished thinking yet. And when they pass, they leave behind something stranger than fear, silence. Not just quiet, but the kind that stretches into the bones. A silence that follows you home. In 2010, a NOAA expedition in the Philippine Trench recorded a sonar trace 27 kilometers long and only 3 meters wide, moving laterally at an unchanging speed of 0.8 knots. It had no propulsion signature, no fluctuation in depth, and made no deviation in its path, not even to avoid the jagged terrain of the trench wall. For 2 days, it maintained this impossible line. Then at 8:37 p.m. on the 3rd day, the signal vanished. Not faded, cut. The last ping was recorded near a sharp decline in the seabed, where the trench plunged into a rarely scanned fold known to locals as the throat of the world. What made the trace so disturbing wasn't just the scale or precision, but the harmonics it left behind. Sonar relays recorded a persistent vibration in the water column for hours afterward. Not a sound, a frequency, subaudible, a pressure oscillation, as if the ocean were still reacting to something that had moved through it. The way air still quivers after a supersonic jet passes overhead. Only this was water. This was deeper, older. The local fishermen, when later interviewed, shrugged. They called it the sleeping one, something that wakes only to stretch. That's all they said. But this isn't folklore, it's a pattern. Years before that, a Norwegian deep trawl rig near the Greenland Sea encountered something it couldn't quite explain. Their nets, rated for nearly 100 tons, came back twisted, not torn, but braided. Ropes bent in symmetrical loops, threaded through each other in patterns resembling Celtic knots. The team thought it was sabotage, except they were 200 nautical miles from the nearest vessel, in weather so foul even birds weren't flying. Attached to the knot, caught in one of the loops, was a fish no one could identify. Pale blue skin, no scales, its mouth had no teeth, but lined its entire body, in rings, like gills but dry. The animal was dead, its body not decomposing, but hardening, fossilizing from the inside out. It was as if something had reached up from the trench, touched their line, and left a message, and then let go. What makes the deep sea terrifying isn't just the pressure or the dark. It's that down there movement isn't measured in aggression or escape, it's purpose. Creatures in the abyss don't sprint, they float. They cross vast distances with no change in speed, no reaction to being observed. And yet when we watch them, we feel watched in return. Not with eyes, with intention. In the South Atlantic, near the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a research drone picked up a biological signal they called the cylinder. The nickname came from its sonar return, a tall, narrow shape, perfectly vertical, descending at a rate too fast for drift, too slow for freefall. It had no flares, no limbs, no fins, but it wasn't falling, it was placing itself, like something returning to its birth. And when it reached a certain depth, just over 9,000 meters, the signal reversed. Not in movement, in structure. The vertical signature rotated on the sonar, its top became the bottom, and it began to pulse, slowly, like breathing. No footage survived. Every camera turned to static during the event, despite no electronic interference. But the sound did. A low rhythmic thud, almost cardiac, almost tectonic, played through speakers. The frequency makes the room tremble, not loudly, but deeply. Enough that technicians reported feeling it in their ribs. There are creatures in the ocean that do not seek light, or food, or even each other. They move because they must, not from hunger, not from curiosity, from design. And when they pass, the world bends around them, currents shift, pressure changes, as if the ocean has to make space for their presence, as if it still remembers them. One such creature, if you can call it that, was seen off the coast of Chile during a rare clear sky dive. Just past the twilight zone, 1,000 meters down, a long trailing form glided beneath the sub. The crew described it as a curtain made of smoke. It had no head, no eyes, just bands of translucent flesh, undulating like a parachute beneath black ink. But what chilled the crew wasn't the shape, it was what came with it. For 18 minutes, every light inside the sub dimmed, battery voltage remained constant, instruments stayed functional, but the brightness faded. It was like being watched through layers of soot. The thing never touched them, but when it passed, every one of them reported the same sensation, forgetting where they were. A moment of total displacement, like they'd been somewhere else, and didn't remember leaving. After surfacing, their watch logs were off by 7 minutes, not missing, repeating. The same entries written twice, in the same handwriting, by the same person, but with different phrasing. One log ended with "I think it's gone." The duplicate ended with "I think it saw us." And that's the truth that haunts the deep. Not that things live there, but that some of them travel. And when they do, the ocean shifts to let them pass. It does not resist. It does not record. It only adapts, like it has seen them before, like it remembers their paths. You often talk about the sea as a place where life began, but we rarely ask what came before life. What drifted through the dark before cells split and thoughts formed. The ones that do not move with violence or fear. The ones that drift too deep to ever rise again, unless they want to. And when they do, the ocean follows in silence, as if it too remembers who built the darkness.
Part 15. When the sea opens its eyes. There are moments in the deep when the stillness is so absolute that it begins to feel like anticipation. When the light from submersibles dims not because of pressure or sediment, but because something is watching it. The deeper the dive, the more common these moments become, yet still, they are not understood, not studied, not formally acknowledged. Because to admit that the ocean watches us back is to admit we are not alone in the way we think we are. That intelligence, attention, might not be exclusive to minds that think like ours. In 2006, a submersible exploring the Cayman Trough reported an encounter with a formation that initially appeared to be a trench-side overhang, a broad, concave dome encrusted with ancient sediment, coral, and filter-feeding colonies. Standard procedure for geological analysis was initiated: laser scans, lidar bursts, sonar mapping. But the sonar return behaved strangely. Each pulse came back with slight distortions, growing more symmetrical over time, as if the surface wasn't echoing sound, but adapting to it. Then, without warning, the entire formation shifted. It didn't collapse. It contracted, recoiling into the trench wall with no disturbance to surrounding water. Like a pupil narrowing against sudden brightness, the operator watching the live feed was heard whispering. It blinked. The dive was aborted. The video scrubbed. But 2 crew members later reported headaches and mild disorientation for several weeks. One described recurring dreams of being underwater in total darkness, unable to move, not paralyzed but held, suspended in the cold, not by force, but by the weight of something watching. Not hostile, just aware. The dreams stopped, they said, only after they went far inland and stayed away from open water. The ocean's ability to camouflage life is legendary, but in recent decades, researchers have begun documenting something stranger than invisibility: false environments. Places in the sea where instruments report normal conditions, yet something is off. Colors that shift subtly in every frame, shadows that don't match their sources, and in some rare cases, reflections in water where no reflective surface should exist. In the Tonga Trench, a probe captured footage of what appeared to be a massive circular dome at 7,000 meters. Its surface shimmered, like oil on glass, but when the lights were angled directly at it, there was no reflection, only darkness. Yet from a side view, the probe's own lights and body could be seen mirrored perfectly in the curve. And stranger still, the reflected image continued to move, even when the probe stopped. A 6-second delay was observed, enough to show the probe blinking, turning, shifting, after it had already done so in real time. Like something was watching and feeding back the memory of being watched. The team labeled the phenomenon an echo vision anomaly and quietly classified the site. But the footage exists, and when slowed, you can see something else in the reflection. A third light, not from the probe, not from any known equipment, flickering, pulsing, like an eye dilating underwater. The idea of the ocean observing us isn't metaphorical anymore. It's beginning to feel anatomical. We've discovered species with distributed brains, octopuses that can think with their limbs, jellyfish that navigate without a central nervous system. We've mapped currents that flow in complex rhythms that respond to lunar cycles, tectonic pulses, even planetary magnetism. What if what we call the deep sea isn't just a space, but a body? What if every trench, every shelf, every drifting swarm of bioluminescence is a kind of nerve ending, a sensory array? Not a collection of separate lives, but one vast slow entity, perceiving us the way we perceive a grain of dust when it falls into our eye. In 2019, researchers operating out of an Icelandic marine station were monitoring thermocline layers near the Reykjanes Ridge. They noticed rhythmic fluctuations in pressure and temperature over a 14-hour cycle. But these pulses didn't match tides, lunar phases, or geothermal events. They were too perfect, too mechanical. A team member suggested, half jokingly, that it resembled the patterns of an electrocardiogram, a heartbeat. That night, the underwater microphones picked up a new sound. Not the familiar low groan of the earth or the chirp of distant marine life. This was a single, resonant thump, deep, precise. It repeated 4 times. Then silence. The team assumed it was equipment failure. But when they played the recording back through frequency isolation software, something emerged beneath the primary wave. A voice. Not language. Not words, just a shape. A pattern repeating at 22 Hz. One that matched the exact harmonic frequency of the human heart. And then there are the visions. Divers returning from extreme depths have long reported brief, intrusive hallucinations, shapes glimpsed in the corner of the eye, distant pulses of blue or red, the sensation of being observed. These were once dismissed as narcosis, a trick of nitrogen saturation, but new breathing mixes have reduced those effects, and yet the reports continue. More vivid now, more specific. Multiple divers in different parts of the world have described a sensation they struggle to put into words, being mirrored, not copied, not reflected, but followed in reverse. One hand moves, and something, somewhere moves backward, as if echoing their actions not from in front, but from within. And always, the sea is calm when this happens. Still, watching. What if the reason so much of the ocean remains unexplored isn't because it's unreachable, but because it does not want to be reached? What if it allows only what it chooses to show? And what if the creatures we encounter, those shimmering, skeletal, translucent things, are not its inhabitants, but its thoughts, its dreams, fleeting, momentary expressions of something vaster than biology? We are arrogant to assume the only kind of awareness is ours. That watching requires eyes. That intelligence must walk or build or speak. But if the ocean has lived for 4 billion years, unchanged, unfathomable, why wouldn't it begin to notice us? And perhaps it has always been noticing. Perhaps every ripple we cause, every frequency we send, every machine we lower into its depths is not exploration. It's irritation. And now, it's looking back. Not with hatred, not with curiosity, just awareness. Because sometimes, when you stare too long into the dark, the sea opens its eyes. Part 16. Beneath the silence, something waits. There are levels of quiet in the ocean that most will never experience. Not the soft hush of shallow waves, or the muted stillness of a calm night at sea, but something far deeper, an oppressive quiet that settles like dust inside the mind. A silence that doesn't merely lack sound, but seems to press inward from all sides. It is the silence of the abyss, the kind that swallows memory, distorts time, and makes even experienced deep-sea pilots forget why they descended in the first place. It's in that silence, many now believe, that something ancient waits, not dormant, but listening. In 2012, a private research expedition, funded by an independent oceanographic institute, was conducting bathymetric mapping near the Diamantina fracture zone in the eastern Indian Ocean. The team deployed a deep-towed sonar array, expecting to map collapsed seafloor ridges. For several hours, the data returned normal. And then a sudden dip, an impossibly symmetrical depression over 2 kilometers long, perfectly oval, with walls so smooth they reflected sonar in neat, uniform bands. A technician joked that it looked man-made. But the laughter didn't last. Because the array's sensors, designed to pick up even the faintest sound from a mile below, went completely dark. No feedback, no interference, just dead air. When the array was reeled in, the cables were intact, but the listening equipment had warped slightly, heat blistered and cold scored at once, like it had passed through extremes that didn't belong together. And more disturbingly, the microphone housing was empty. The hydrophone was gone. Not snapped, not cracked, simply removed. The casing still sealed, still bolted shut. No evidence of tampering, but no explanation either. That night, the crew reported difficulty sleeping, not from fear, but from dreams. The same dream, shared by multiple members. In it they were floating in open water, miles above the seafloor, staring down into the trench. Only it wasn't dark below. It was lit by soft blue light, and something vast and slow was circling upward toward them. Not a creature, a shape, like a building made of water and bone. They awoke in unison,
The logbook noted the time, 3:14 a.m., the same moment the sonar station, which had been powered down for the night, activated on its own and transmitted one ping. The sound that came back wasn't static. It wasn't even mechanical. It was breathing. And the longer the team listened, the more convinced they became that what they had recorded was not a sound that traveled through water. It was a sound waiting in it. There have long been reports of null zones in the ocean, places where radio waves, sonar, even light, behave unpredictably, ships that lose compass accuracy, submersibles that drift slightly off course despite precise thruster input, divers who surface in locations miles from their projected position. In most of these cases, the anomalies are dismissed as magnetic interference, thermal currents, or simple human error. But when data is pulled together, when the locations are cross-referenced, a pattern begins to emerge. These null zones form a rough ring, not a perfect circle, but a perimeter, a wide lopsided boundary stretching across multiple trenches and fracture zones. And at its center lies what marine geophysicists have come to call the quiet field, a region of deep ocean where nothing natural has been recorded. No whale songs, no tectonic rumbles, not even background microbial gas vents. Nothing. Just silence. And the few times researchers have tried to study it, their equipment has failed in increasingly disturbing ways. One probe, sent in 2017 by a university research team, returned from the quiet field covered in a thin black film. It wasn't algae, it wasn't silt. Under a microscope, it appeared to be organic, but not alive. The structure made of repeating protein chains wrapped around empty carbon skeletons, like a cell that had never been born. Worse, the casing of the probe showed no signs of contamination upon entry. The film had formed only after reaching its deepest point, as if it had been grown on the metal surface, like the ocean had tried to clothe the intrusion, or mark it. Another probe, deployed 2 years later, didn't return at all, not because it was lost, because it sent back a final message: halt descent, presence below, shape inversion detected. Then silence. No one could explain what shape inversion meant. It wasn't a default warning, it wasn't even a programmed phrase. It had been typed manually by the onboard AI assistant, an autonomous learning module meant to interpret anomalies into human-readable language. And whatever it saw, or detected, or imagined, led it to describe the unknown in only 2 words: presence, below. So we ask, what waits in the silence? Why does the ocean preserve certain areas from noise, from contact, from even the most basic biological trace? The sea has always been a place of transition, between land and life, between heat and cold, between surface and core. But what if some parts of it are not meant for us, not just unreachable, unshareable? What if something else has always owned that silence, and we've simply mistaken its patience for permission? Because the sea does not make mistakes. Its currents obey the moon, its depths obey pressure, its life obeys gravity and light. But in the quiet field, none of these laws apply, and perhaps that's because what lives there does not come from rules we understand. It does not respond to frequency, or touch, or curiosity. It has no need to reveal itself, because it has already done so in the way silence falls when we approach. And it waits, not sleeping, not hiding, just resting in the one place the world still hasn't learned how to look into, beneath the silence, where all things return. Part 17. The depths that don't end. There are places in the ocean where the floor simply doesn't come, where depth readings continue long after the known limits of the trench have been reached, where submersibles descend, expecting a gentle taper, and find instead a falling cliff, a void so wide that it swallows sonar pulses without echo. These are the depths that don't end, not because they're bottomless, but because the ocean doesn't want to stop. Places where geology gives way to something else. Not space, not pressure, but absence. And within that absence, some believe, lies a truth that humanity has not been prepared to understand. The Kermadec Trench, northeast of New Zealand, is one such location. Officially, it stretches over 10 kilometers deep, measurable, finite, mapped. But in 2015, a joint expedition between several Pacific nations detected what was believed to be a narrow fissure along the trench's western wall. When a probe was lowered to examine the site, it fell freely for 6 minutes before making contact with anything solid. Based on drop speed and time, The fissure extended an additional 2.4 kilometers below the recorded trench floor. The readings were dismissed. Equipment failure was blamed, but the footage remained, grainy, disoriented, but clear enough to show a moment of strange clarity. At the deepest point of descent, the light from the probe flickered and then briefly was met by another. A flicker of movement, not mechanical, not mirrored, a reflection of light where no surface existed. The ocean, for 1 second, looked back. What was stranger was what happened afterward. The probe, upon retrieval, contained no memory of the final descent. The last 10 minutes of footage had been overwritten, not with static, not with black, but with pure white frames. Overexposure was ruled out, pressure damage ruled out. One frame, when digitally enhanced, showed what appeared to be tiny repeating dots, not pixels but symbols, arranged in concentric rings, like fossilized braille. A linguist called in for analysis later claimed that the structure resembled language, but not any human one. He called it topographical syntax, a language made not of words, but of shapes. The ocean, it seemed, had written something back. Even more disturbing are the accounts of divers who claim to hear the abyss, not just in the way sound travels underwater, but in their bones. One deep-sea saturation diver, working off a drill ship in the Gulf of Mexico, described a sensation during a solo repair operation. He was 300 feet down, tethered, breathing slowly, when he felt a pulse, not through the suit, through himself. A pressure that wasn't a wave or current, but a message. He didn't hear it. He remembered it, like a sentence he never learned but had always known: "You've gone far enough." The trench beneath him was not particularly deep. There was no seismic activity, and yet when he surfaced, his heartbeat remained irregular for days. A medical scan showed no damage, but inside his eardrums were tiny symmetrical scars, not burst from pressure, etched, deliberate, like something had marked him. And then there are the creatures that appear only near these endless zones. Organisms that don't drift or swim, but hover, their movement non-directional, as if unaffected by gravity. One such specimen was captured briefly by a robotic arm during a test mission in the Java Trench. It resembled a ribbon of blackened tissue, coiled in loose spirals. No eyes, no fins, but as it was reeled upward, it began to unravel, not fall apart, unmake itself. Its body stretched until it was translucent, then colorless, and finally invisible. Not because it left the frame, because it no longer existed in a form that could be recorded. By the time it reached 5,000 meters, the only thing left was a shadow cast on the sub's floor, a shape without substance. The scientists never published the footage. Instead, they shut down the dive and returned to port. Privately, one of the lead researchers wrote in their log, "We've been assuming we're reaching deeper into the ocean. What if it's the other way around? What if it's the ocean reaching into us? Because maybe these bottomless places are not empty. Maybe they're not even part of this planet, in the way we define it. Maybe they are intersections, zones where Earth's rules wear thin, where something else begins. Something that doesn't measure time in years or geology in pressure, but waits in the weightless dark for us to keep coming. Every probe, every sonar ping, every descent, an invitation answered not with welcome, but with silence. And the further we fall into these places, the more that silence thickens. It becomes shape, message, boundary, not just the end of pressure or light, but the beginning of something else entirely, a threshold. The ocean, after all, is not uniform. It is stitched together by wounds older than memory, trenches that split continents, rifts that never healed, mouths that never closed, and beneath them, perhaps, depth itself is alive. Not a creature, not a god, just a force, one that doesn't think or want or rage, it only waits. And when we reach too far into it, it doesn't respond with wrath. It simply opens. Part 18. Creatures that shouldn't be moving in the deep sea. Movement is a luxury, light is scarce, energy scarcer still, and evolution has honed its residents into masters of stillness. Most deep-sea creatures drift or pulse slowly, their bodies conserving effort with every moment of inertia. But in the farthest reaches, near trench walls, near black smoker fields, in the haunting zones where even sonar dares not echo, there have been sightings of things that move with deliberate precision. Creatures that shouldn't be moving, not because they're injured or dead, but because they look like they were never alive to begin with. These are not animals that swim or glide, they adjust. Their motion is mechanical in rhythm, but organic in shape. They don't react to light, or current, or bait.
They simply exist until they choose to do otherwise. In 2014, a deep-sea ROV scanning the western edge of the Mariana Trench caught sight of an anomaly. At first, the crew assumed it was an optical illusion, just a column of rising sediment from a small collapse along the trench wall. But the column maintained a perfectly upright shape, spinning slowly. It was semi-translucent, about 4 meters tall, and tapered at both ends like an hourglass made of smoke. As the ROV drifted closer, the object rotated again and moved sideways, not turned, shifted, across the current against pressure gradients. With no visible form of propulsion, the object passed beneath the ROV's lights. For 5 seconds, every electronic sensor on board dimmed. The video feed did not go dark, but the brightness dropped in a perfect symmetrical curve, like the light was being absorbed evenly. And within that dimness, something became visible inside the creature, a twisting geometry, faint and shifting, like the outline of vertebrae that didn't connect, shapes that rotated without pivot, segments that didn't match. A skeletal form, but wrong, not built to hold muscle or protect organs, built for something else. For structure, for containment. The team terminated the dive immediately. On recovery, every LED in the lighting system had burned out, not from heat, from cold. The lights had been flash frozen internally, leaving frost behind the lenses. No damage was done to the exterior housing. The creature was never seen again. A similar event took place off the coast of Antarctica, during a late winter research mission into under-ice currents. Divers beneath a 3-meter thick ice shelf reported seeing a moving shadow in the snow, a phrase that confused analysts until video from a helmet cam was examined. The footage revealed a shape beneath the divers, swimming slowly between 2 layers of slush and brine. It looked like a manta ray, but moved like no known species. Its wings rippled vertically, not horizontally. Its outline shimmered, as though it wasn't fully in phase with the water. The creature seemed to exist in flickers, sometimes transparent, sometimes defined. What disturbed the team most wasn't the shape or size, it was the silence. The creature made no sound, not even the subharmonic vibrations that normally accompany underwater life. It was like watching a video on mute, but from inside the scene. Divers later described a feeling of being in someone else's dream. Some even said they felt emotions that weren't theirs. Grief, confusion, restraint, like the creature was projecting thought, not to communicate, but to filter its presence through something we might understand. There's a hypothesis, shared quietly between oceanographers and fringe theorists, that some deep-sea organisms may not be from a continuous line of earthly evolution, that instead they emerge from conditions so isolated, so alien, they develop in self-contained pockets. Evolutionary sealed chambers that function on rules different from ours. Creatures born not from competition, but from pressure, temperature, and chemical logic. Born not to survive, but to stabilize their environments. And when the environment changes, when something foreign enters, like us, they respond with presence. Not attack, not retreat, just movement. The kind that says this space is not yours. In the Puerto Rico Trench, a creature known only as the Coil has been reported multiple times. Each sighting is slightly different, but always shares one detail, a spiral shape that rotates in impossible geometry. It has been described as a snake, as a tendril, even as a rope twisting in zero gravity. But the most disturbing descriptions come from submersible crew members who've passed within 100 meters of the anomaly. They describe feeling pulled, not physically, but mentally, like the creature was reaching into their thoughts and turning them slowly. One pilot reported thinking about home, about childhood, about memories that didn't feel like his own. Another reported hearing a sound that was not sound, a scraping in his thoughts, like something trying to be remembered. The subsystems reported no gravitational anomaly, no magnetic disruption, and yet one of the navigation gyros spun in place for 13 minutes. The pilot remembered none of it. These creatures, if they can be called that, may not think. They may not eat, reproduce, or even perceive time as we do, but they move, and that movement is intentional, as though they're keeping something in balance, as though their existence is not about life, but about containment, not of themselves, but of something else, something deeper, because there are zones in the ocean where these movements concentrate, places where nothing else lives, where currents circle endlessly, where light bends slightly off axis, where every machine sent to explore returns with a new scar, scratched metal,
melted wiring, camera feeds that skip seconds like a missing heartbeat. And always in the background of these anomalies, motion, not violent, not erratic, just movement that shouldn't be there, deliberate, patient, present, creatures that shouldn't be moving, but are.
Part 19. The black bloom. In the deepest layers of the ocean, beyond where sunlight ever dares to reach, life tends to move slowly, if at all. There is a stillness in those waters, one born of cold, weight, and eternity. It's a silence so absolute that even bacteria slow their replication cycles, and where the brightest spark of light is a flash of bioluminescence lost to the dark. But not all movement in the abyss is gradual. Not all growth is organic in the way we understand it. Because sometimes, something down there blooms, not with petals, with purpose. In 2009, a team of researchers deploying sediment sensors along the Tonga Trench recorded a strange biological spike. It began with the usual, a minor increase in microbial activity, consistent with nearby vent fields. But then the numbers jumped. Cell counts multiplied exponentially, not over weeks or days, but over hours. Something unseen was growing, filling the water column at depths nearing 10,000 meters. Yet nothing visible appeared on the ROV's camera feed. No clouds, no particulates, no swarms of plankton or algae, until it moved. One of the sensor units, barely the size of a shoebox, sent an emergency signal. It was being displaced. Not pulled, not dropped, carried. As the feed switched to the onboard cam, the screen showed a rippling field of darkness. Not shadow, not absence of light. A textured, fibrous blackness, clinging to itself like a fluid organism. It had no distinct edge, only density, like a cloud of ash underwater, but thick enough to push against metal. The team called it the black bloom. It wasn't a creature, they said. It wasn't a colony or swarm. It was a condition, a phase the water entered, or perhaps a form the water was taught to take. When the bloom passed, all nearby life, what little there was, had vanished. Crustaceans, anemones, even the microbial mats lining the trench floor, gone, not consumed, erased, as if the biology had never taken root there at all. For weeks afterward, that section of the trench showed no signs of regrowth, no recolonization, no return of bacteria, even under stimulated lab reseeding. The environment had become inert, not dead, unwelcoming, like the water had rewritten its code and refused to be biology again. Years later, similar events would be recorded in the South Sandwich Trench and again off the coast of the Kuril Islands. In each case, the bloom manifested the same way. First a spike in microbial noise, then an unexplained movement of local instruments, and then the complete biological erasure of the zone. But one location deep within the Sunda Trench offered something different. The ROV deployed there caught the bloom from above. Instead of a slow drift, it emerged like a flower erupting from mud, a spiraling pulse of black, layered in concentric bands, each ring moving in counter-rotation to the last. And in the center, for the briefest moment, was a hole, not a void, a shape, a hexagon, edged and sharp, like geometry embedded in water. It lasted only seconds before collapsing inward again, but one frame was preserved. It showed the shape flickering with dozens of tiny lights, not glowing, blinking. A pattern, recorded and replayed frame by frame, revealed timing intervals, not regular, not rhythmic, encoded. The research team ran the sequence through spectrographic analysis and came back with something chilling. The blinks matched acoustic waveforms, specifically, waveforms mimicking whale distress calls, sped up and overlaid with human infant cries. When the audio was converted and played back at deep-sea pressure-pitched frequencies, the resulting tone caused headaches, nausea, and most notably, a sensation of descent, as if the listener were falling, even when seated. What emerged from that experiment was never published. One of the engineers, reportedly unable to sleep for days after, scrawled a single phrase in a notebook found near the Sound Lab's door. It's not trying to be seen, it's trying to be remembered. The black bloom, as far as we know, doesn't remain in one place. It appears in isolation, in the deepest points of the world, and only briefly. But its aftermath is always the same: sterilization, the removal of presence, as if it is undoing something, not consuming, correcting. So what is it? Some say it's a defense mechanism,
The ocean's way of healing itself when foreign presence becomes too great. A purge. Others believe it's a remnant, something older than cells or DNA, a form of memory encoded in pressure and temperature, a structure that is not alive, but awakes, momentarily, when the conditions match some forgotten trigger. The most unnerving theory, though, is that the bloom is not of the ocean at all, that it descends, not from above, but from below, from beneath even the deepest trenches, from a place not mapped, not touched, not because we haven't reached it, but because it is not meant to be reached. The ocean may be deep, but perhaps it rests atop something deeper still, something the bloom returns to, something it belongs to. What if the bloom is a messenger? What if it's a warning, not to us, but to everything else? To the bacteria, the fish, the eels, the ancient coral trees. A message saying, leave, this is not yours anymore. And what if one day it doesn't recede? What if it stays? What if it blooms, fully, not in a single trench, but across all of them, all at once, quiet, black, erasing what little life the abyss still allows, not in anger, not in hunger, but in purpose. Because the sea, for all its silence, has memory, and memory, when threatened, defends itself. Part 20. The room beneath the ocean. There are legends among deep-sea crews, quiet ones. Whispers passed between divers and submersible pilots when the surface is GPS drifting a little off, depth gauges flickering once, then steady, and then the silence. An unnatural quiet, where even the sound of the vessel itself seems muted. Divers and pilots alike describe it as the moment the sea stops responding, as if everything familiar, currents, pressure, bioluminescent scatter, simply ceases, and then they see it. It doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it's a perfect cube of smooth stone nestled in the trench wall. Other times it appears as a massive circle, like a tunnel or dome. Once it was described as a staircase descending into the trench wall, each step impossibly flat, without erosion, covered in a silt that slides off like powdered glass. But no matter the shape, the description ends with the same word, room, because it isn't part of the ocean, it's inside the ocean, and it should not be there. In one of the earliest recorded versions of the story, a Soviet bathyscaphes in the 1960s, conducting Cold War sonar tests off the coast of Kamchatka, picked up a cavity beneath the trench that had no seismic signature. The sub descended to investigate. The pilot reported seeing an opening, tall, narrow, and lit from within. No lights on the sub could have reached that far, and yet something was glowing, not bright, not inviting, but constant.
He didn't enter.
He hovered for a moment, watching. Then the feed cut. The bathyscaphe returned safely to the surface 30 minutes later, but the pilot refused to speak about what happened. The tapes were archived. Years later, a maintenance worker transferring old data found them. There was no footage, only audio. A single phrase whispered in Russian. It looked back. What makes this myth persist isn't just the variety of people who tell it, scientists, engineers, even high-pressure welders, but how they all describe the same sensation. Not all, not fear, but wrongness, as if the ocean itself didn't approve, as if they had seen something sacred, not in a divine way, but in the way old places are sacred, sealed, buried, forgotten on purpose. The room is not built for us. Its angles are wrong. Its proportions feel stretched in a way that tricks the eye. Some report a pressure that increases the longer you stare, not physical pressure, emotional, like shame, like guilt for interrupting something ancient. And yet some do enter. A Brazilian mining drone in 2016 veered off course during a trench-side stability test. Its final ping showed a slow, steady descent through a fissure never mapped before. For 27 minutes, it transmitted footage of what appeared to be a sloped tunnel. Smooth walls, no marine growth. At the bottom, a square chamber. In the center of the chamber, nothing, just floor. But the drone's light revealed markings carved into the ground. Not letters, not what possible force, natural or otherwise, could create a room beneath the sea, smooth and symmetrical, untouched by pressure or time. Some believe it's a remnant of a civilization lost before records, before ice, before even landmasses settled. Others suggest it's not a ruin at all, but a functioning structure, meant not to house life, but to anchor something. A stabilizer, a container, a lock. And if that's true, the question becomes obvious. What was so dangerous that the ocean built a room around it? More troubling still are the psychological effects. People who have claimed to witness it, even briefly, report symptoms weeks or months later: detachment, loss of time, a sense that the sky feels thinner than it used to. Several describe the same dream, descending through a tunnel that never ends, with walls made of rippling water, and at the bottom, instead of a floor, an eye. Not literal, just the idea of one, immense, open, watching, not with curiosity, but with recognition. There is one theory, whispered in very few circles, that the room is not made of stone at all, that it is made of pressure itself, folded, compacted, shaped into something permanent by forces we do not understand. A knot in the fabric of the ocean, and like all knots, it serves a purpose: to keep something from unraveling. We map the ocean floor, we build machines to explore, to measure, to uncover, but we never ask what the sea hides because it loves to hide. We never consider that maybe the sea is hiding from something too, that maybe the trenches were not just carved by tectonics, but willingly deepened, shaped to contain. And when the silence gets too deep, when the current drops and the light fades and every sound vanishes but your own heartbeat, maybe that's the sea's way of warning you not to turn back, not because it's dangerous, but because what lies ahead remembers you, and it has not forgotten the last time something like you found the room.
Part 21. The Watchers in the Drift. There are currents in the ocean that no satellite can trace. They do not follow the tides, nor the wind, nor the lunar pull. They do not obey temperature gradients or salinity shifts. They are invisible to instruments, yet their effects are unmistakable. They drag things, not violently, but deliberately. Slow arcs across the ocean floor, silt swirled in looping spirals. Abandoned equipment shifted meters away from where it was dropped, despite no sign of flow. These are the drifts, and within them some say something watches. The term drift watchers started as a joke in old naval circles, tales of shadows that follow dive teams without leaving any trace. Shapes spotted just outside the beam of a submersible's lights. But over time, the reports piled up, and their consistency grew difficult to ignore. In nearly all cases, the events happened deep below 5,000 meters, where darkness is not a lack of light, but a quality, a presence, a texture you can feel inside your suit, on your skin, behind your eyes. It begins with disorientation. Crew members report the sensation of being followed, even when alone inside sealed vessels. Navigation software begins to lag, not freeze, not fail, just hesitate. As if second-guessing, cameras record fine, but playback reveals anomalies, flickers, glitches in geometry, a shape that doesn't exist in 3 dimensions, caught only in one frame before vanishing. Long, thin, curved, like a tendril or spine, always watching from the same angle, behind and above. In 2011, a Japanese scientific expedition near the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench deployed a deep-anchored research rig designed to stay submerged for 72 hours. It had no propulsion, just a stationary body with rotating cameras and environmental sensors. After 2 days of normal readings, the cameras began to turn on their own, not randomly, but slowly, toward a fixed point behind the rig. The rotation motors weren't activated. There was no current to explain the movement. And the most chilling part, the rig itself had no built-in movement detection AI, but the cameras moved as if tracking something. The footage captured showed a faint glow in the distance, pulsing irregularly, organic, but without a source. A shape began to emerge in the haze. A long vertical line, flickering like a shadow behind glass, then another, parallel, then a horizontal slash above them both. For 7 minutes, the rig's lights dimmed slightly, exactly 11%, and in that dimness, the lines appeared to curve, becoming a figure. A face, not human, not animal, a suggestion of symmetry. Not enough to define, just enough to unsettle. The rig was retrieved ahead of schedule. The research team never published the visual files, but fragments were leaked later, enough to cause debates across marine biology forums, deep-sea cryptid groups, and even military black project theorists. Some believed it was a rare deep bioluminescent predator. Others claimed it was a false image caused by overlapping particulate layers. But one oceanographer, reviewing the footage in private, wrote something simple beneath their analysis. It noticed the camera first,
This matches a theme across multiple expeditions. Whatever the drift watchers are, they are not passive. They appear only when deep-sea machines are at their most still, when propulsion systems are shut down, when humans aren't looking for anything. They do not approach. They allow themselves to be seen, briefly, like a test, like curiosity, or warning. Some divelogs describe watchers appearing in pairs, like mirrored streaks on opposite sides of a vessel, always equidistant. Others describe a singular shape, pacing a submersible's speed without making contact. In 2018, a crewed dive near the Atacama Trench reported strange reflections in their external glass at 7,000 meters. The pilot swore he saw a second cockpit outside, an impossible image, mimicking their vessel but backward, empty. Yet it hovered in place, reflecting every movement a second before they made it. Another pilot later described hearing something through the hull, not sonar, not equipment chatter, breathing, but not human, not shallow or deep, just present, like lungs without a body, synchronized with his own. What are these watchers? Some theorize they are life forms evolved entirely in the void, sensitive to movement, not sound, creatures that do not swim, but follow, that see us not by sight, but by anticipation. They move through stillness, drift along paths we cannot perceive, not hunters, not prey, just sentinels of an environment we were never meant to touch. Others go further, suggesting they are not life forms at all, but reflections from another reality, shadows cast across some multi-dimensional fold, evidence that the deep ocean intersects with places physics hasn't caught up with, places where space ripples like cloth and time loops quietly, unnoticed by those who pass through it too quickly. Perhaps the most haunting theory is this: the watchers are not new, they are not rare, they are always there. We simply aren't still enough to see them. They wait in silence, not because they fear us, but because they remember what we are. We are movement, we are noise, we descend with lights and thrusters and metal limbs that grasp and sample and drag. But when we finally stop, when the systems pause and the batteries dim, they drift close, and they observe, not with malice, with understanding, because in their world stillness is everything. It is how they live, how they think, how they see. And when we finally learn to be quiet, that's when they know we're there, and they watch. Part 22. The hunger at 11,000 meters. Every living thing we know, every plant, animal, microbe, requires energy, whether from sunlight, chemical reaction, or the consumption of other life. All existence is tethered to a basic law: feed or fade. In the upper layers of the ocean, that law is familiar. Fish eat smaller fish, coral absorbs nutrients from drifting plankton. Even bioluminescent creatures, glowing like stars, survive on trace chemicals and slow metabolism. But in the deepest zones, at 11,000 meters and below, there is almost nothing to eat. Nothing moves, nothing grows, and yet sometimes something feeds. At the very bottom of the Mariana Trench lies a depression within a depression, known unofficially as Point Omega by the few scientists who've attempted to map it. It's not officially acknowledged because it defies classification. The pressure there is beyond crushing, beyond lethal. It folds metal like paper, shatters reinforced glass, slows electronic signals until they flicker behind real time. The sediment is packed so tightly it behaves almost like flesh, rippling under stress, resisting penetration. It is, in a word, wrong. And yet in 2020, a remote deep crawler designed by a private German institute made it into that space. The mission was simple: take core samples from the trench's lowest point, record any anomalies, and ascend. What it found instead was evidence of digestion, not fossilized bones or dissolved materials, not the slow deconstruction of time and pressure, but bite marks, clean, symmetrical, spaced like teeth. They were found in the metal of the crawler itself, 37 minutes after it reached the seafloor, indentations too deep to be pressure warping, too smooth to be collision damage. There was no current strong enough to move anything into the crawler at that depth, nothing that could have caused such uniformity. And yet the marks were there, parallel lines, set in a perfect arc, wrapping the machine's casing like a mouth pressed against it with intention. When analyzed later, the pressure required to make those marks was calculated at 25 times the bite force of a great white shark. Yet there was no cracking, no shearing, only impression, like something tasted it. What kind of organism could do that? No living creature on Earth should survive that depth unaided, let alone move, hunt, or bite. But when the crawler was recovered and disassembled, researchers found something else. A film, not a fluid, not a growth. A thin mucus-like substance coating the bottom edge of the machine, dense with protein chains that didn't match any known life form. More disturbing, the proteins were not complete, they were partially formed, like something had begun to synthesize digestion, but stopped, as if whatever made contact had expected flesh, not metal. But the most unsettling discovery came from the onboard cameras. During its descent, around 10,860 meters, the feed briefly glitched. One frame, just one, was corrupted. It showed nothing but darkness, no sediment, no movement, no static, just absolute black. But in the audio channel, something hummed. Not a voice, not a machine, just a tone, low and constant, like a warning siren buried beneath miles of water. It didn't match any geological vibration or known frequency, but when run through a spectrographic analysis, it revealed a pattern. The waveform was complex, layered, as if multiple voices or forces were speaking simultaneously in a language of vibration. One sound analyst described it as the oral equivalent of looking into an eye that does not blink. What kind of life can live at that depth? More pressingly, what kind of life wants to? There are theories. One of the most prominent suggests that at these depths, evolution no longer favors the physical, it favors the behavioral. Creatures do not evolve muscle or speed, they evolve strategy, deception, lures, the ability to mask their presence so completely that even sonar cannot find them, and in doing so they develop the one trait that has never been needed in the ocean before: patience. If something exists at 11,000 meters, it does not chase, it does not ambush, it waits, for hours, days, centuries maybe, until something foreign enters its world, something warm, something slow, something edible. Some scientists have quietly speculated that these deep entities are not even fully physical as we understand it, that the pressure, darkness, and chemical saturation at such depths allow for forms of existence more akin to fields than bodies, fields that can feel, taste, and yes, feed, by wrapping around prey and breaking down its presence until all that remains is data, memory, imprint, that they do not chew, or tear, or swallow, they erase. Because feeding in the abyss may not mean nourishment of the body, it may mean absorption of identity, the stripping away of being, a slow, soundless consumption of what something was until it becomes part of the dark. This would explain the diver reports of losing time near trench walls, the equipment that returns without data, the dreams of floating in cold water, not swimming, but drifting towards something vast, only to wake with tears in their eyes and no memory why. As if part of them had been sampled, not completely, just enough. So maybe the bottom of the ocean isn't simply a physical place, maybe it's a kind of threshold, a digestive tract that doesn't belong to one creature, but to the sea itself. And maybe that's why the trenches are shaped like mouths, long, open, yawning wounds in the earth, lined with silence and filled with waiting. And maybe, just maybe, hunger is the oldest thing there is in the sea, older than fish, older than light, older than the sound of waves crashing on shore, and it still waits, at 11,000 meters.
Part 23. The station that vanished in the early 1990s, before the widespread use of satellite relays, and before real-time oceanic telemetry became standard, deep-sea research relied heavily on semi-permanent underwater stations. These stations were built to endure the pressures of the abyss, allowing instruments to remain thousands of meters below the surface for months or even years. Most of these units operated in predictable ways, collecting data, logging current flows, measuring seismic activity, and occasionally filming whatever crossed their lenses. But its sensors were state-of-the-art for the time, redundant, hardened, precise. It was lowered into the trench and successfully pinged surface contact upon arrival. For the next 48 hours, it sent clean telemetry, pressure, temperature, chemical composition. Then it went silent. No alarms, no fault logs, no evidence of damage or failure, just nothing. Assuming transmission failure, the team prepared for retrieval. The station, equipped with an automatic ascent system, triggered by coded command, failed to rise. A manual acoustic release was initiated, no response. A second dive, using a nearby recovery sub, descended 3 days later to investigate. What they found was a void. The exact coordinates of Echo 7's landing zone showed only a dusted imprint in the silt. No wreckage, no debris, not even scratches on the trench wall. It hadn't been crushed or buried, it was simply gone. At first, the incident was labeled a retrieval failure. Perhaps the release mechanism had jammed, or the beacon had malfunctioned. But what puzzled the team most were the last 4 seconds of transmitted data. Just before going dark, the station's sonar array recorded an echo, not an animal, not a rock, a perfect return signal. A mirror, something down there had sent the signal back. Identical, not altered, not diffused, as though something beneath the station had become reflective, not in light, but in presence. Years later, a whistleblower from one of the participating agencies leaked internal correspondence. The emails mentioned more than a technical failure. Divers on the recovery mission had reported a sensation upon nearing the trench floor, a weight behind their eyes, a dissonance in their thoughts. One pilot noted in his log, "The water isn't thick down here, it's dense with memory, like being watched by something that forgot you once and doesn't want to make that mistake again." Another strange detail emerged from archived sonar logs. 2 hours before Echo 7 vanished, a faint vibration had been detected from below the seafloor. Not horizontal movement, not tectonic, a vertical tremor, like something rising beneath the trench, not a quake, a pulse. It repeated 4 times, then stopped. The interval between pulses increased exponentially, then silence. There is a theory, rarely spoken aloud even in private research circles, that the deepest trenches are not entirely natural, not in shape, not in behavior, that some of them are hollow in ways we cannot detect, not caves, not caverns, but structures so large, so submerged in geological time, that they defy recognition, that what we think of as the seafloor may be little more than the roof of something else. And occasionally, when pressure shifts or human interference triggers the wrong sequence of vibrations, the ocean doesn't react, it responds. Echo 7 was never found, not a single piece. And yet 4 years later, a different research probe operating 800 kilometers away, near the Mariana Trench, captured something unexpected. A metallic object drifted across its camera feed. It was smooth, engraved with a shallow alphanumeric code etched by corrosion. A match was later confirmed. It was a casing panel from Echo 7, but the chemical signature didn't match seawater corrosion patterns. It had been exposed to temperatures and pressures higher than any known on Earth, and it was partially magnetized, impossible, given its original non-magnetic composition. The ocean does not lose things lightly. Wrecks scatter, corpses rise or sink, sediment swallows what it can, but to erase a titanium station, remove all trace, and return only a single scarred fragment years later, that is not chance. That is not current, that is intention. Some believe Echo 7 descended into something deeper than the trench, not by falling, by being taken into a fold or rift not visible to us. A chamber beneath the Earth's crust that pulses once every few years and opens just long enough to feed on observation, not maliciously, but with curiosity, to study what dared to descend, and when finished, return only a piece as if to say, "We saw you too." And if that's true, then the ocean is not merely a body of water, it is a gate, a thinking boundary between worlds, between pressure and presence, memory and matter. And sometimes, when we knock too boldly, it opens, just wide enough to remind us we are not alone, and then it closes again. Part 24. The ones that wait without moving. There is a category of fear that sits beneath all others, deeper than predators, more ancient than darkness. It is the fear of something that simply waits, not because it lacks purpose, but because its patience is a kind of weapon. In the vast and unmapped hollows of the deep ocean, there are things that do not swim, hunt, or flee. They do not emit light or respond to stimuli. They are not dead, and yet they do not live in any way we understand. They are present, and they wait without moving. In 2004, an oceanographic team operating in the Mozambique Channel deployed a benthic lander fitted with time-lapse cameras, pressure sensors, and passive sonar to study abyssal sediment flows. The lander descended to over 6,300 meters, settled silently into the silt, and began its 72-hour observation cycle.
For the first 26 hours, everything proceeded normally: microbial drift, slow scuttling crustaceans, the occasional blind eel flickering across the edges of the frame. Then at hour 27, the image changed. It didn't shift, it didn't cut, it became still, too still. The seafloor, previously active with tiny movements, turned to stone. Nothing entered or exited the frame. No current passed, no silt drifted. It was as if time had stopped, but only in that exact rectangle. Even the digital timestamp on the footage continued ticking forward. The lander kept transmitting, but the image did not change. Until hour 29, a shape appeared, not entering, not emerging, existing. It did not cast a shadow, nor did it displace any surrounding particles. It had no defined edge, just a distortion in the image. A presence that bent light the way heat bends air. It remained for 8 full minutes. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, it was gone. Playback analysis revealed something chilling. During those 8 minutes, the image was not frozen. It was moving by fractions. Every 10 seconds, the distortion shifted a pixel, but only on a single axis, as if it was turning to face the camera, so slowly that the eye could not detect it. The researchers called it the Watcher frame, and it wasn't the only time they saw it. Other teams began reporting similar anomalies, across oceans, years apart, always at extreme depths, always involving stationary platforms. The descriptions varied in shape and clarity, but they shared a signature: no biological response. Nothing near the object would react to it, not by fleeing or attacking. They would simply stop, shut down, as if in reverence or fear. The prevailing theory among those brave enough to speculate is that these presences are not life forms at all, but pressure echoes, manifestations of deep time, compressed into forms our senses barely register. They don't move, because they don't need to. They don't feed, because they are not part of the same ecological chain. They exist in a different thread, one where waiting is not passive but predatory. In 2012, a manned submersible descending into the Philippine Trench passed within 30 meters of what the pilot at first mistook for a rock formation: flat, upright, perfectly symmetrical, like an obelisk planted in the trench floor. The pilot turned on a lateral light panel to examine it. The moment the beam hit, every reading on his control panel flatlined. Cameras still worked, but telemetry was gone. Internal sensors stopped responding. Even his wristwatch froze, not ticking slower, frozen. When he surfaced 6 hours later, his watch resumed picking up from the exact second it had stopped. Reviewing the footage, researchers noticed something subtle. As the light struck the formation, a pattern appeared on its surface. Circular rings, etched with tiny ridges, like fingerprints pressed into the stone. The rings rotated counterclockwise, only once, then vanished. The pilot didn't see them in real time, but when asked later to describe what he felt, he said, "Like I was being remembered by something I hadn't met yet." No one speaks of these things in open conferences. They are data anomalies, sensor malfunctions, optical illusions. That's what the reports say. But the people who go back into the water, the divers, the pilots, the deep crew, they remember. They speak in glances, in pauses. They leave out certain coordinates. They whisper warnings that sound like folklore but settle too deep in the bones to be dismissed. There is something at the bottom of the sea that does not chase or flee or even observe in the way we understand. It remains, fixed, not anchored by mass or force, but by meaning. A kind of sentinel, not built to watch over, but to witness. As if what it guards isn't a location, but a truth. And that truth perhaps is this: we are not alone in the dark. Not because other creatures swim beside us, but because something down there waits. It waited before us. It waits still, not sleeping, not waking, simply being, until we notice, and then it remembers us too. Part 25. The Silent Network Beneath the Sea. In the study of the deep ocean, one of the most elusive challenges is understanding communication, not ours. Ours is loud and temporary, reliant on cables, sonar, and blinking lights. But the ocean's, because it has its own systems, signals that move without current, that cross impossible distances without a clear medium, frequencies that don't follow the known laws of sound. For decades, these have been dismissed as anomalies. But recently, a growing body of evidence suggests something extraordinary, that the deep sea may host a kind of network, not built, not mechanical, but ancient, organic, and very much alive. It began with low-frequency anomalies, recorded in different trenches thousands of miles apart, sounds too consistent to be coincidence, but too faint to triangulate. The same pulse appeared near the Kermadec Trench, off the coast of Japan, and again within the Puerto Rico Trench, all within hours of each other. Not an earthquake, not biological chatter. These signals were slower, deeper, a tone that moved like a heartbeat, but not of a creature, of the Earth itself. A French oceanographic institute, studying plate movement, first noticed the pattern. At first they believed it to be related to thermal vent activity, perhaps a geothermal resonance. But when the signal was recorded again 3 months later, at exactly the same hour, the theory collapsed. Hydrothermal vents do not operate on clocks, nor do fault lines pulse in clean intervals. Something was broadcasting. Subsequent analysis revealed another detail. The pulses varied slightly in frequency from one trench to the next, like regional dialects. Yet they retained the same rhythm, and in the seconds between the pulses, barely perceptible shifts in ambient frequency were detected, like interstitial noise, like response. This discovery led to a controversial hypothesis. What if the trenches weren't just scars in the ocean floor? What if they were nodes, junction points in a kind of planetary lattice, natural structures designed not to store or channel energy, but to listen and respond? What if the Earth's deepest places weren't just geological features, but elements of a distributed organism? A silent network built not from neurons, but from pressure, mineral, and time. That's when the stories resurfaced. Divers who'd worked near multiple trenches reported the same dreams weeks later, dreams of being submerged in a great chamber, surrounded by pulsing walls. Not mechanical, not organic, just dark. In the dream they weren't floating, they were suspended, like data packets inside a signal. A few described hearing voices, not in language, but in sensation. A message without words: you have been noted. In 2019, a government-funded deep drone deployed to the South Sandwich Trench returned with data showing fluctuations in water density that were impossible under known physics. At intervals matching the mysterious pulse, the water briefly thickened, as if infused with something denser than matter, but with no measurable change in mass. The drone's lights dimmed during these events, even though battery power remained stable. A review later revealed that during each pulse, its internal clock slowed by milliseconds, then recovered. Time itself was bending. At first, this was assumed to be a quirk of gravimetric distortion near tectonic boundaries. But similar distortions were soon observed in trenches with no tectonic activity at all. That's when the network theory gained traction in quiet circles of geophysics. What if these signals weren't environmental at all? What if they were sensory output? A team from Norway attempted a targeted response, broadcasting a synthetic mimic of the pulse sequence from the bottom of the Malloy Deep. The signal was sent every 3 minutes for 2 hours. Nothing happened. Then, precisely 47 minutes after the final transmission, the ocean responded. The return signal did not match the original. It was faster, shorter, compressed, a dense burst of sound lasting exactly 0.83 seconds. But in that tiny burst, over 4,000 unique frequency layers were encoded, too many for any known marine organism to produce, too ordered to be geological. When the signal was slowed and processed through a spectrogram, it formed shapes, patterns that looked written, not letters, not numbers, but nested spirals, interlocking curves, recursive loops, more art than language, more function than form. The data was reviewed, then classified. What's perhaps most disturbing is what came next. Every sensor buoy in a 100-kilometer radius began to fail, one by one. Not immediately, not violently, they simply ceased. Systems intact, batteries full, no data, just silence, as if they'd been unplugged from reality itself. 2 weeks later, a fishing vessel recorded sonar readings of a structure that hadn't existed before, a vertical column rising 300 meters off the seafloor, perfectly smooth, untouched by current or marine life. It pulsed once, then vanished. A week later, another appeared in a different ocean. If the ocean is a network, then it's not passive. It doesn't merely carry signals. It responds. It reshapes. It decides. This would explain why deep exploration becomes increasingly unreliable past certain depths, why footage cuts, why drones lose guidance, why submarines record anomalous pressure data that makes no sense. The ocean may not want to be measured, not because it resists intrusion, but because it is already doing the measuring. And we are not the observers, we are the subjects. And the network watches, from trench to trench, from dark to darker. It listens, it remembers. And when we speak into it, when we tap its walls and shine our lights and hum with machines, we are not probing into silence. We are interrupting a conversation that has been going on for millions of years. And sometimes, the ocean chooses to respond. Part 26. The sleepers below the rift. The mid-Atlantic ridge is a scar that splits the ocean floor from the Arctic to the southern tip of Africa. It is not one place but a winding fracture in the crust, stretching across continents, breathing heat and pressure through hydrothermal vents and molten fissures. It is a rift born of violence, tectonic plates grinding, cracking, shifting over millennia. But somewhere along this colossal seam, there is a depth not yet mapped, a hollow too symmetrical to be dismissed, and a silence too deliberate to be natural. This is where the stories of the sleepers come from. Unlike trenches, which plunge like daggers into the earth, the rift descends with strange grace, a smooth sloped funnel carved with spiraling walls. Submersibles that pass near it report anomalies. Slight magnetic interference, unexplained compass drift. More curiously, a noticeable drop in ambient biological activity. No fish, no plankton, not even bacteria in the silt. The ocean here is not empty, it is held. In 2016, a British-American expedition aiming to study volcanic gas exchange deployed an AUV autonomous underwater vehicle fitted with ground-penetrating sonar and high-fidelity magnetometers. The plan was simple: chart the rift, tag hotspots and return. But halfway through the mission, the AUV began transmitting corrupted data, not blank, just wrong. Coordinates were inverted, pressure readings fluctuated erratically. Then came the sonar map. The image looked like rows, lines of oblong masses, buried just beneath the seabed, each about 20 meters in length. There were 17 of them, equidistant, aligned with the curvature of the rift. The AUV's computer marked them as subrock formations, likely basalt. But one technician noticed something odd. They weren't solid. Each showed a faint signature of a hollow center, shielded by a dense outer shell. And when the vehicle passed over them, a low-frequency pulse was recorded, not from the AUV itself, but from the ridge. A wave of pressure, just one, too deep to hear, too perfect to ignore. That was when the term sleepers was coined. Not as a joke, as a warning. Because a second pass over the anomaly yielded new data. One of the masses had moved, only by a few degrees, just a tilt, as if adjusting. No seismic activity had been recorded. No current strong enough to displace anything that heavy. But the sonar was clear. The object was no longer aligned with the others, and its hollow center had changed temperature by 2.3 degrees Celsius. Something inside it had stirred. The AUV was pulled from the mission immediately. The official reason was hardware instability, but internal emails later leaked described a different reason. The pulse recorded earlier. It had a pattern. A recursive frequency that matched heartbeat rhythms, not human, but biological. Amplified and extended, it played like slow thunder, deep, continuous, and terrifyingly patient. It wasn't a signal, it was breathing. Speculation erupted. What could lie buried beneath one of the most geologically volatile regions on the planet, resting in unnatural formation, shielded from time by the pressure and heat of the mantle itself? Some theorized they were ancient life forms, creatures from a time when the Earth was still forming, cocooned in self-made shells to withstand the world's cooling. Others believed they weren't native to the Earth at all, that they were vessels, grown or forged, seeded into the rift, not by chance, but as part of a design. A message, a warning, a contingency. One fringe theory suggested the sleepers weren't sleeping at all. They were listening, hibernating in a state of total metabolic suspension, not for survival, but for timing, waiting for something to return, or for something else to stop. Human presence, perhaps, or geological conditions, or maybe, waiting for a signal. What frightened the researchers most, however, was a realization made months after the discovery. When someone overlaid the formation's coordinates onto ancient maritime maps, they found something disturbing. The site matched a location marked in 15th century sailor logs with a symbol no longer understood, a glyph found again in Babylonian clay tablets, and once more in carvings near Lake Baikal. Always the same design, a spiral wrapped around a vertical line, labeled only as the still below. Independent divers who have strayed near the coordinates report disturbing experiences, a sudden pressure in the chest, a sharp drop in temperature, and a hum, not in the water, but in the body. One diver described it as hearing with my bones. Another claimed to have seen shadows beneath the seabed, moving without displacement, like silhouettes behind frosted glass. One returned from a dive early, wide-eyed and shaking, repeating a single sentence, "I didn't see it, but it saw me." And then there's the final anomaly. During one of the last sonar passes before the site was abandoned, the team recorded a spike in seismic resonance. Not an earthquake, a resonance. Every trench sensor within a 500-kilometer radius registered it. It lasted 11 seconds, and it ended with a shape, a pattern traced by pressure waves that when visualized formed a circle, perfect, impossibly precise, a boundary. When mapped, the sleepers fell within its edge, inside, contained, and that is the most terrifying theory of all, not that the sleepers are trapped, but that they are being kept separate, not by chance, not by nature, but by design. Something down there sleeps, something buried, something alive enough to move in its rest, to pulse once every few years with pressure that changes the water itself. Something that may not be dreaming at all, just waiting.
Part 27. The ship that shouldn't float. In 2003, a cargo vessel named the Allura Grey was spotted adrift in the South Pacific, hundreds of kilometers from any known shipping lane. The ship had no active transponder, no distress signals had been sent, its hull was rusted but intact, and its deck, from a distance, looked untouched. It was found by a New Zealand weather surveillance drone, drifting, motionless, in one of the quietest and deepest parts of the Pacific. When authorities arrived days later, expecting to recover wreckage or a derelict, they found something else entirely. There was no crew, no signs of panic, fire, or flooding. The cargo manifest was missing. Navigation logs had been wiped, but the most unsettling detail was the vessel's draft, the depth at which it sat in the water. Despite appearing to be a fully loaded freighter, the Allura Grey floated nearly 2 meters higher than it should have, as if its entire cargo hold was empty, or full of something that didn't weigh as much as it should. Inspectors boarded the ship. The bridge was clean, the electrical systems were dead, no auxiliary power. Below deck the lights were out, but emergency backup systems had flickered on long enough to leave faint burns in the wiring. Nothing unusual was recovered at first, but the lower cargo hold, located beneath the engineering deck, told a different story. The walls were warped, not crushed, not blown out, warped, bent inward in symmetrical patterns, arcs that curved toward a central point in the floor. At the center was a round depression about 6 feet wide, scorched black. No heat damage elsewhere, no sign of fire, just this singular spot, like something had pulsed outward, reshaping metal and then vanishing. Instruments sent below to analyze the distortion began to fail. Compasses spun, temperature sensors returned null values. Radio contact was lost within that one room. Crews who entered reported a sensation of pressure, not physical, but cognitive, like thoughts slowing, time stuttering. One technician left the space pale, whispering, "It's deeper than it looks." Further analysis revealed that the Allura Grey hadn't been registered anywhere in maritime databases for over 30 years. It had vanished in 1972, en route from Singapore to Chile, with a full load of industrial drilling components and 26 crew members aboard. The ship had been written off as lost to piracy or storm, and yet, here it was, 3 decades later, floating in calm water, with not a single trace of decay consistent with that passage of time. Barnacles clung only to the lowest hull line. Paint was faded but not eroded. Its anchor chains were unrusted. Even the emergency rations in the galley were edible. And yet, the crew was gone, not disappeared, absent. Their quarters looked unused. Bunks were made, cabinets empty. No personal items remained, as if the ship had been cleared, but not by human hands. But that wasn't the strangest part. In the deepest part of the ship, inside the strange scorched depression, a hatch was found.
welded shut from the outside. A recent weld, still faintly warm when discovered, it was cut open. Beneath it, a vertical shaft, steel, coated in condensation. No ladder, no rungs, just a smooth descent with damp walls. Cameras were lowered inside. They recorded 37 meters of clean descent. Then at the very bottom, water, still water, perfectly flat, pitch black. A diver was sent in, tethered, with an oxygen rig and thermal sensors. His descent was slow, controlled. At 10 meters below the shaft opening, he stopped moving. No distress, no struggle, just halted. When pulled back up, he was alive, but non-verbal. He stared at the ceiling for hours, his pupils fully dilated, and eventually muttered one sentence: "The ocean's not down, it's through." He was never cleared to dive again. Later analysis of the water at the base of the shaft revealed that it didn't match surrounding ocean samples. The salinity, pressure, and thermal gradient were inverted, as if the water had been collected from somewhere deeper than any known trench, possibly from beneath the oceanic crust. Its molecular behavior showed signs of unknown isotopes, slightly radioactive, slightly magnetic, not natural, not terrestrial. The ship was towed back to port for further study, but 2 nights before it arrived, the vessel vanished, towed by satellite-tracked barges, under armed escort. A storm passed over during the final leg. Visibility dropped for 30 minutes. When the storm cleared, the ship was gone. Chains snapped cleanly. No wreckage, just a section of the ocean now devoid of marine life for over 20 kilometers in every direction. Not a fish, not a jelly, not even plankton. Today, the Allura Grey is spoken of in hushed tones across deep-sea forums and by salvage crews who patrol the Pacific. Some believe it was never a ship, but a delivery system carrying something across time or between points not meant to intersect. Others say it was a vessel retrieved from somewhere it never should have gone, that it came back not because it was found, but because it was let go. As a warning, as a test, the notion that a ship could disappear and return decades later is disturbing enough. But the idea that it returned carrying a door to somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere outside, is a story that keeps even the most seasoned sailors awake. Because the sea may hold lost vessels, forgotten relics, and ancient beasts. But sometimes what floats up from the bottom isn't from the bottom at all. Sometimes it's from the other side. Part 28. The static field beneath the Gulf. In 2021, a deep ocean survey team operating in the central Gulf of Mexico detected an anomaly at a depth of over 4,800 meters, a zone roughly the size of a city block where radio and sonar equipment ceased to function without apparent cause. Known as an acoustic dead zone, this patch of ocean floor didn't just block sound, it seemed to absorb it. There were no echoes, no returns. Even the sound of the ship's own engines vanished when directly above the area, leaving only a heavy silence that technicians described as pressing against the ears not around them but inside them. Initially, this was written off as a natural magnetic anomaly, perhaps an unusual mineral deposit or a pocket of methane gas interfering with transmission. But when the team deployed a submersible drone equipped with passive recording devices and hardened communication tethers, the mystery deepened. As the drone entered the perimeter, its video feed remained stable for less than 90 seconds. The lights flickered, the image froze. Then, without any sign of mechanical failure, the feed resumed. What returned was not a typical view of the seafloor. Instead, the video showed the interior of what looked like an artificial space, flat stone surfaces marked with regular grooves, arranged not haphazardly, but geometrically. There was no silt, no fauna, no coral, just smooth structures disappearing into the black, faintly glowing, with a deep blue bioluminescence that pulsed at intervals of exactly 88 seconds. No fish swam through this space, no current stirred. It was a chamber, it seemed, or something built to mimic one. The operators froze. The drone's positional sensors still read the correct coordinates for the anomaly in the Gulf, but nothing in the video matched the expected terrain. A perfectly smooth floor, arched ceilings, openings that looked like corridors extending beyond the limits of the lens, as if the drone had slipped, not in position, but in context. And then, the static began. It wasn't video distortion, it was visual. The feed became blanketed by a crawling interference, not white noise, but a pattern. Black against black, shapes like runes etched across the screen, appearing and disappearing in an organic rhythm. not random, repeating. The patterns were analyzed later by linguistic experts and digital signal theorists. One conclusion stood out. The symbols were self-similar across frames, recursive like fractals. They carried no known syntax or language structure, but responded to input. When the drone's lights dimmed, the symbols brightened. When the drone released a sonar ping, the pattern shifted. It was not just a signal, it was a reaction. At precisely the 11-minute mark, the drone's tether began to retract automatically, a pre-programmed failsafe in the event of prolonged contact loss. As the camera panned upward during extraction, the last recorded image was simple, terrifying, and silent. A flat wall covered in a honeycomb pattern of hexagonal openings, each about a meter wide, and inside each, the faint suggestion of something curled, not moving, just waiting. The feed cut. The drone returned fully intact, but its internal storage had been wiped blank, every chip scrubbed with what looked like magnetic overload, though no external surge had occurred. More unsettling, the drone's outer shell was coated with a film unlike anything ever catalogued in the Gulf. A translucent gelatinous layer laced with embedded crystalline fibers. They shimmered faintly in UV light. Microscopic analysis revealed a lattice-like structure identical to the patterns seen in the static field. It was as if the symbols had imprinted themselves directly into the molecular surface of the drone. What kind of intelligence resides down there? One that does not move or chase or hunt, but codes itself into the matter it touches. Some now believe the anomaly isn't a place at all, that it's a gate, but not in the science fiction sense. It's a rift in perception, a pressure fold in reality, where certain physics do not hold, and where consciousness itself might be recorded, translated or read. That what the drone entered wasn't just a space, but a function, a kind of equation being solved, slowly, eternally, beneath the crushing weight of the Gulf. The silence in that zone persists. Other ships have passed nearby and lost temporary access to their sensors, their compasses spinning briefly, their hulls vibrating in ways no current can explain. Marine animals avoid it entirely. Dolphins swim around it in wide arcs. Whales fall silent when approaching. Even plankton density drops to near zero within the perimeter. Whatever is down there is not sleeping, not hiding. It is active, but in a way that does not conform to motion or energy as we understand it. Its presence is a form of calculation, a waiting intelligence that does not reach out, but waits to be encountered, to be read, or worse, to read back. Some researchers now refer to it not as the anomaly, but the observer, because it never moves, because it never blinks, because it already knows we're watching, and it's deciding how to answer.
Part 29. The lights that should not rise in the cold waters off the coast of Greenland, near the edge of the continental shelf, where the ocean floor drops steeply into the abyss. Fishermen have told the same story for generations. They speak of lights, not stars reflected on waves, not vessels or flares, but rising lights, pale and slow, that ascend from the deep, too deep. Lights that appear beneath the boats in perfect stillness, motionless at first, then slowly lifting toward the surface, sometimes one, sometimes dozens, always silent, always far too large. In 2015, a Norwegian trawler named the Havsøker reported such an event in its voyage logs. It was a routine fishing expedition, just past midnight in calm weather. The sea was glass, no current, no wind. Then, without warning, the ship's sonar picked up a dense cluster of contacts rising from below, uneven in shape but massive in size, emerging from a depth of over 4,000 meters. The crew believed it to be a pod of whales, but when the contacts reached within 100 meters of the surface, the lights appeared. They were not reflections. They came from within the shapes, at first dim, like distant ship lanterns seen through fog, but then brighter, cold, white-blue light, the kind you'd associate with deep-sea bioluminescence. But these weren't jellyfish or plankton. The sonar showed no movement. The objects were not swimming. They were rising in place, maintaining perfect geometric spacing, a lattice of lights emerging vertically, pulsing once every 12 seconds in unison. Then they stopped. Exactly 28 meters below the surface, the lights froze mid-ascent. Not a ripple, not a shimmer, just still, as if considering the ship above. One of the deckhands leaned over the edge, with a flashlight. He pointed it downward. The moment his beam crossed the waterline, the lights blinked, not out, but once, simultaneously. A flash of recognition. Then, one by one, they sank again, slowly, like stars returning to the sky in reverse.
The sonar stopped registering their presence once they passed the 2,000-meter mark. Then nothing. The crew didn't speak for hours. When they returned to port, they submitted the footage. The official response from maritime authorities was a short note: anomalous bioluminescent event. No cause for alarm. But the footage tells a different story. When analyzed frame by frame, the lights exhibited impossible properties. No bleed in the water, no refraction distortion. They were not affected by the ocean itself. They glowed as if inside a vacuum, as if the sea had simply been parted around them. And there's something else. The pulses, those slow rhythmic flashes, were not random. A researcher later mapped the intervals against recorded seismic data and discovered a terrifying coincidence. The pulse intervals matched known tectonic microshifts, the slight regular movements of the Earth's plates beneath the seafloor. The lights were pulsing in sync with the planet. So the question isn't just what the lights are. The question is, what are they listening to? One theory posits that these are not creatures, but sensors, autonomous entities left by an unknown intelligence, embedded in the deep as part of a surveillance system. Not ours, not even necessarily Earth's. Their placement at tectonic boundaries and abyssal zones would make perfect sense: natural energy sources, limited interference, and strategic coverage of pressure differentials across the planet. They could lie dormant for millennia, feeding off chemical gradients, waiting only for a trigger, a change in energy output, a ship overhead, a sonar ping, a flashlight. But the older theory, the one whispered among Arctic sailors, is darker. It says the lights are not machines, they are eyes. Not metaphorically, literally, vast bio-optic receptors belonging to something slumbering beneath the crust. Not dead, not dreaming, just watching, not up at us, but across, toward each other, maintaining their alignment, keeping formation, observing the sea itself, as though monitoring for movement that does not come from above. Because the theory goes that we are not what they're watching for, they are waiting for something else, something old, something forgotten by the ocean, but not by them. And when that thing stirs, when the sea shifts in a way it hasn't in eons, the lights will rise again, not to warn us, not to greet it, but to join it. So the next time you're out at sea on a calm night, and you look down and see a light rising through water that shouldn't glow, don't shine your own light back, because it's not asking to be seen, it's seeing if you remember it. Part 30. The breathing abyss far south of the known shipping lanes, beyond the chaotic weather patterns of the Southern Ocean, lies a stretch of water so empty, so rarely traversed, that some maps mark it as unmonitored. Sailors call it the Blue Hollow. Scientists rarely speak of it at all. On the surface there's nothing unusual, just deep, endless ocean, and a calm that seems to hush even the wind. But beneath it lies a formation unlike any other on Earth. A pit, not a trench, not a canyon, but a circular void in the seafloor, nearly 20 kilometers wide, and so deep that no expedition has reached its base. It is called the breathing abyss, and it is perhaps the ocean's most terrifying secret. The first recorded contact came in 1978, during a Soviet deep-sea mapping mission. Their submersible drone Mirror-1 descended into the pit, guided by pressure sonar. It made it to 6,000 meters. Then it began to rise again, not because it was recalled, but because something below had pushed it back. A vertical current, smooth and unnatural, forced the drone upward despite full descent power. Its sensors overloaded. The signal went dead. The crew recovered the drone hours later. Its hull was intact, but the titanium casing had been stretched, not dented or cracked, stretched, as though the entire frame had been exposed to something that warped time or matter in a subtle but irreversible way. The interior instruments, once perfectly calibrated, no longer returned accurate readings. Even the most basic altimeter spun uselessly. What alarmed the scientists most, however, was the final fragment of sonar data. For just under 8 seconds, the drone had recorded a regular, rhythmic pulse. It was not tectonic. It was not mechanical. It was organic, a sound that rose and fell, like a deep, slow inhale. Then nothing. The Soviets classified the data and abandoned the project, but they had already named the anomaly, the Daikani, Russian for the breath. Decades later, private exploration groups, armed with better tech and fewer restrictions, returned to the site. They dropped probes fitted with the most advanced stabilization systems and reinforced pressure hulls. Most failed, but in 2007, one succeeded. The footage is difficult to watch. The camera descends past 8,000 meters. Darkness consumes everything. Then at 9,400 meters, the pressure readings stop increasing. Instead of continuing to rise, as they should at those depths, they stabilize, then fall. The probe is still descending, but the pressure is dropping. It defies physics. A kilometer lower, gravity appears to shift. Readouts become inconsistent. Orientation fails. The camera spins. Then it steadies, and what it shows is impossible. The seafloor opens up not into a basin, but a vast hollow chamber, ringed by walls that curve like the inside of a lung, smooth, layered, organic in texture, yet made of black stone that reflects no light. The pulse continues, louder now, like the entire space is exhaling. One deep movement every 60 seconds. Not air, not water, something in between. The currents do not ripple or swirl, they undulate, guided by no external force. It is not the sea that moves in here. It is the space itself, and then the eye. For a single frame, the camera catches it. A massive circle, embedded in the far wall of the chamber. Not a real eye. There is no iris or pupil, but the shape is undeniable. Concentric rings, pitted texture, a faint shimmer like a film of glass over fluid. It does not blink, but it does change. It contracts slowly, as if responding to the probe's presence. Then the pressure spikes. The probe implodes. That footage, recovered from an auxiliary tether, triggered a frenzy of debate. Most scientists refuse to acknowledge it. Some call it a fabrication. Others say it proves what some feared: the breathing abyss is not a passive geological feature. It is a living structure, not in the way a coral reef lives, in the way a slumbering beast breathes. A few radical researchers propose that the abyss is not simply alive, but aware, that it is not merely reacting, but anticipating, responding not to sound or motion, but to conscious attention, that the very act of observing it changes it. There are legends, ancient ones spoken by isolated coastal communities near Patagonia, of the Yacana, the sleeping mouth of the sea. They say it opens once every 1,000 years, not to consume but to inhale, to drink in the world above, to taste the surface, and to remember what was once forgotten. They say it is not evil, it is not cruel, it is just ancient, older than Earth's continents, older than light. Since 2007, no crew has returned to the breathing abyss. Satellites show no sign of seismic activity, no ships chart the area, even birds seem to avoid flying over it. But once a year, on the same date and hour that the final probe descended, instruments placed nearby record a faint shift in the water, the same rhythm, one pulse, one breath. Whatever lies beneath the blue hollow has not moved, it has not risen, it has not spoken, but it still breathes, and it remembers being seen.
Part 31. The whale that sang to nothing. In early 1992, hydrophones scattered across the North Pacific picked up a strange signal. At first it was assumed to be whale song, long, low calls rising and falling through the water like lonely musical notes. But this song was different. Its frequency was higher than any known whale call, registering at 52 Hz, outside the hearing range of all recorded baleen whale species. It was constant, patterned, and most haunting of all, singular. No response, no echo, no chorus, just one voice calling into the dark. Marine biologists dubbed it the 52 Hz whale, and over the years it became something of a scientific ghost story. Every migration season, the signal would return, moving south to north, then back again, always alone. No other whale ever answered. No other species matched the pattern. It was as if the ocean had given birth to a creature designed to be unheard. For a time, the leading theory was that it was a malformed blue whale. Others thought it might be a hybrid, a rare cross between a fin whale and a blue whale, a genetic accident resulting in a call too strange to be recognized. But despite advances in tracking, tagging, and satellite imaging, no visual confirmation was ever made. Ships that passed near the sound's origin detected no unusual sonar returns. It was there, and then it wasn't. Moving with the season, as if following ancient routes known only to itself. But something changed in 2004. That year, for the first time, the 52 Hz signal split. Not a second whale, not quite, but an echo, a double tone. One primary signal, then a second, fractionally delayed, fainter, and slightly off-pitch. At first it was believed to be reverberation, an underwater reflection off a seamount or trench wall, but the delay wasn't constant. It shifted, sometimes closer,
sometimes further, as if whatever was mimicking the sound was responding, not reflecting. This began a new wave of theories. Perhaps the 52 Hz whale had never been alone. Perhaps there had always been something else listening and learning. Then came the deeper anomaly. In 2011, a deep-sea probe deployed to record tectonic activity near the Kuril, Kamchatka Trench captured an unexpected acoustic profile. The 52 Hz signal, clear and distinct, originated from below the trench floor, not from water, but from within a layer of sediment nearly 100 meters thick. The sound wasn't traveling through ocean, it was resonating through rock. Even more disturbing, the frequency was dropping. Slowly, over time, the call had shifted downward, losing hertz over the years, deepening, darkening, as if whatever was making the sound was aging, or descending into something colder, quieter, less like a cry, and more like a hum. For the scientists who believed it was biological, this was tragic. The idea of a single, malformed animal calling out in vain across decades was heartbreaking enough. But for others, the shift in frequency suggested something else. The call wasn't fading, it was becoming something else. That same year, deep-sea hydrophones detected another anomaly, not sound, but silence. A widening cone of audio null, where no marine sounds were heard at all. No whales, no clicks, no engine noise, just absence. The null zone grew over the next few weeks, matching the migratory path of the 52 Hz signal, exactly, as if something massive and unheard was sweeping the ocean clean of sound wherever it passed. One team proposed the unthinkable: the whale never existed, that the original signal had been an artifact, a kind of lure, not a creature, but a mechanism, testing responses, that the mimicry, the echo, was the real source, that the 52 Hz tone had been bait, a broadcast, waiting for ears to hear it, studying the silence that followed, learning how marine life reacted, or didn't, for decades, until one day it began to imitate the whales that never responded. And now, it moves without them, not faster, not louder, just steadier. Its call has become almost tectonic in tone, less a song and more a vibration, deep and low, traveling for hundreds of kilometers without losing shape. Seafloor sensors now pick it up across the Bering Sea, along the Aleutian Trench, through the broken ridges near the Challenger Deep. Each tone follows a rhythm, a slow repeated rise in frequency, followed by a sharp drop, like breath in reverse. We still call it the 52 Hz whale, out of habit, out of hope. But what if it was never a whale at all? What if it's listening? What if the ocean, in its unfathomable depth, has awakened something that once slept below the threshold of sound, something that needed time to learn what life sounds like, how it moves, how it sings, and now that it knows, it sings back, but not to be heard, to see who listens, and who sings in return. Part 32, The Object That Doesn't Sink. In the southern reaches of the Indian Ocean, where maritime traffic is sparse, and the depths stretch beyond the reach of most submersibles, lies a sector referred to by certain military reconnaissance satellites as Zone 0 Beta. To the public, it's simply an unremarkable patch of ocean, cold, deep, and far from anything. But beneath its waves, something floats, or rather, fails to sink. It was first recorded in 1984 by an Australian defense satellite sweeping for Soviet submarines. A metallic signature, roughly 50 meters in diameter, was observed drifting slowly across a stretch of ocean where no vessel had been reported. It cast no wake, it showed no heat signature, and when planes were dispatched to visually confirm the object, nothing could be seen. No shape, no disturbance on the surface. But the satellite insisted it was there. The object reappeared again in 1991, then in 1998, then more frequently after 2010, always in a slightly different position, always beneath the surface, by exactly 2 meters, and always with the same signature, a dense core of high metallic concentration, surrounded by a halo of distorted electromagnetic interference, as if wrapped in a field that made detection difficult, not invisible, just indescribable. When unmanned underwater vehicles were eventually sent to intercept it, they encountered a phenomenon that still defies explanation. The object couldn't be seen with light. Sonar bounced off nothing. And yet when the vehicles passed through the projected coordinates, they experienced resistance, not like hitting a wall, more like moving through thought. Their instruments slowed, not mechanically, cognitively. Their onboard AI took longer to process commands. Memory access times increased. Visual feeds lagged by fractions of a second that accumulated into full delays. It was as if something was affecting not the machines themselves, but their sense of time. After passing the location, the anomalies ceased. On one mission, the drone dropped a tethered weight above the object, expecting it to pass through open water. The line stopped falling at exactly 1.96 meters below the surface, as though it had touched glass. But when retrieved, the weight was dry, no water, no residue, just an absence, like it had passed through a vacuum within the sea. What's more disturbing is what happened afterward. For 6 hours following the experiment, the water around the drone began to rise in temperature, not from below, but from the sides. And along with the heat came sound, a deep subharmonic tone, below human hearing, but enough to shake the casing of the equipment. The same tone, repeating every 11 minutes, matching exactly the rhythm of a long-dead pulsar on the opposite side of the galaxy. Researchers now believe the object is not of this ocean, possibly not of this world. One theory proposes that it is a temporal anchor, something designed not to move through space, but to exist across time, always at the same depth, always resisting both gravity and displacement. It does not float because of buoyancy, it floats because it must. Because its presence is locked to a very specific coordinate in the fourth dimension, and the ocean has simply risen and fallen around it for thousands, maybe millions of years. There is evidence it may have been referenced before. Polynesian oral traditions speak of a sky stone that was found not in the heavens but below the sea, so still and eternal that it made the tide afraid to move. Sailors who sailed too close were said to forget how to count the stars, to lose all direction, not by compass, but by intuition. Like the ocean near it whispered wrong things into their sense of balance. In 2017, a commercial airliner passed directly above the zone during clear daylight. The pilot reported nothing unusual, but one passenger, an astronomer by profession, filed an unusual note upon landing. He described a sudden reverberation inside the aircraft cabin, like a brief harmonic that passed through his chest, triggering a moment of vertigo and nausea. No other passengers reported it, but at the precise moment he noted the experience. Satellites recorded a brief, perfectly spherical ripple in the water below, a dome-shaped displacement. It lasted less than a second, as if the object had breathed. The prevailing fear is not that the object will rise, but that one day it may drop, that something has kept it pinned at that exact point for a reason, something old and deliberate. And if that tether weakens, if that lock breaks, what will be unleashed is not a creature or a machine, but an event, a moment that folds outward from the center of the sea, reaching back through time, rewriting whatever came before. So the object drifts on, 2 meters below the surface, never sinking, never rising, watching, or perhaps listening, or simply holding a place in the sea that was never meant to be open. And every few years, it pulses again, like a reminder, not to us, but to the ocean itself, that something waits, just out of reach, just under the surface, and it will never leave.
Part 33. The submarine that came back wrong. In 1973, during the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Navy launched a classified reconnaissance mission into the Sea of Okhotsk. The submarine, Kunmite 129 Echo 2 class, was equipped not only with conventional weapons, but with deep-sea listening devices and experimental radar absorption panels along its hull. Officially, the operation never existed. Unofficially, it was part of a project codenamed Kaming Glebina, Depth Furnace, an effort to investigate seismic anomalies detected along the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench. For the first 48 hours, the mission proceeded without incident. The submarine descended deeper than standard protocol allowed, well below the crush depth of most known vessels at the time, but the hull held. Communications with command were intermittent, but intact. Then on the third day, K-129 vanished. No emergency beacon, no distress call, just silence. For 2 weeks, the Soviet fleet scoured the region. They found nothing. No debris, no oil, no sign of implosion. It was as if the ocean had swallowed the submarine whole. And then precisely 21 days after it disappeared,
K-129 surfaced on its own, several hundred kilometers north of its original position. When the retrieval crews boarded the vessel, what they found defied explanation. The external hull was intact, the navigation lights were active, the ship had power, but no crew. Every cabin, every corridor was empty. No bodies, no blood, no damage, just absence. Meals had been prepared and left on tables, uneaten. Clothes were still in lockers. One officer's cap was found resting on the radio console, as if it had just been placed there. It was as though the crew had stepped out for a moment, mid-task, and never returned. And then came the logs. The internal data system had been wiped clean. However, a single backup tape was found, buried in an engineer's toolbox behind a false panel. It contained just one audio file, 43 seconds of distorted sonar chatter. Not speech, not wails, something else. Something that started as a deep rhythmic pulse and rose into a sharp keening frequency before cutting off. An audio specialist later noted the pattern resembled a biometric waveform, not unlike a heartbeat, but too fast and too regular. The Soviets towed the vessel to a secured naval dock near Vladivostok. Scientists and engineers swarmed the ship, but the longer they stayed aboard, the stranger the reports became. Clocks ran out of sync with the rest of the base. Electrical equipment malfunctioned randomly, especially anything with magnetic components. Several workers began complaining of nausea, headaches, and in rare cases, an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. One officer, during routine inspection, suffered a seizure after standing in the command center for only 2 minutes. He awoke repeating a phrase in perfect English, a language he did not speak. They weren't alone. In the lower levels of the ship, temperature readings fluctuated wildly. In the torpedo room, a pocket of air remained 10 degrees colder than the rest of the vessel, unaffected by heating systems. Instruments placed there would often fail to start or record garbled data. One marine engineer placed a voice recorder in the space for 12 hours. The audio retrieved was chilling, metal groans, yes, and hull strain, but also something softer, something that sounded like breathing. The submarine was eventually sealed and mothballed. Its location has since been redacted from all known records. Some say it was buried in a trench. Others believe it was disassembled and scattered, but whispers persist that parts of it, sections of hull plating, wiring, even a single navigational computer, were repurposed into other Soviet vessels. And that strange things began happening to them too. Navigation errors in calm waters, power drains during clear nights, and always that same repeating sonar spike, like a distant signal trying to finish a sentence that was never meant to be heard. A Western intelligence agency, after intercepting fragments of internal Soviet communication, dubbed the event the Black Return. Not because of the color of the submarine, but because what came back was not the same as what left. That something else had filled the space where the crew had been. Not a creature, not a force, something more abstract, a memory that the sea had stored, a replication, a placeholder for what the ocean had decided to keep. To this day, the Russian Navy does not acknowledge K-129's final voyage, but its sonar signature still appears, once every few years, near the Kuril Trench. Always briefly, always alone, the vessel calls home, but no one answers. Because perhaps what came back wasn't trying to return, perhaps it was trying to replace. Part 34, the signal that waited for silence in the remote southern Atlantic, near the Bouvet Triple Junction, a tectonic point where 3 major plates converge, sits one of the quietest stretches of ocean on the planet. This isn't a poetic metaphor, it is a measurable fact. The ambient acoustic levels in this region are inexplicably lower than in almost any other part of the world. No whale song, no shrimp crackle, no tectonic murmurs, just vast still silence. For years it was dismissed as a coincidence, a place between migratory routes, between seismic stress points, between currents, until 2002, when that silence was finally broken. A listening post operated by an international marine observation array, Project Vela, registered a narrowband signal unlike anything ever recorded before. It wasn't loud, in fact it was so faint that it was nearly dismissed as noise. But its clarity was unmistakable, a perfect harmonic interval of 4 notes, spaced evenly over a 20-minute cycle. Every hour, on the hour, like a beacon. But not one calling for help, one that had been waiting. The The signal repeated for precisely 6 days, then without warning, it stopped. Dozens of hydrophones placed in a radius of 500 kilometers recorded the same thing. Total silence before, total silence after. Nothing unusual in temperature, salinity or pressure. No signs of tremors. No marine migrations. And yet something had chosen that place, that time, to speak. When the data was analyzed further, a pattern emerged that disturbed even the most skeptical engineers. The tones were not arbitrary. They matched the harmonic overtones of an ancient string instrument, specifically the sistrum, an Egyptian ritual instrument, used to invoke protection from unseen forces. The frequencies weren't perfect matches, of course, but the ratios were nearly identical. When played back using a physical model, the tone resonated too cleanly, like it had been designed for something with structure, not water, as if the signal wasn't being broadcast through the ocean at all, but through something beneath it. A team was sent to deploy a passive sonar glider near the center point of the emission. At first, all systems operated normally. The glider descended to 3,000 meters and began its wide circular pattern. Then it paused. No error, no malfunction. It just stopped transmitting telemetry. The only signal it continued to send was a basic depth pulse, like a heartbeat. And that heartbeat was not alone. 20 minutes after the glider's anomaly, another signal was received, this time not from the glider, but from beneath it. A second pulse, delayed by less than half a second, mirroring the frequency and rise time of the glider's own ping, as if something was answering, not with data, not with voice, just with presence. The glider eventually surfaced, seemingly unharmed, but its internal memory had been reset. All logs, all diagnostics, gone. Only the outer hull gave a clue that anything had happened. Along its underside, microscopic pitting, thousands of tiny indentations in a perfect spiral pattern that wrapped from bow to stern in a Fibonacci sequence. Not random corrosion, not damage from fauna, but geometry carved or grown into the metal with precision that no known biological or environmental process could explain. What emerged in the following years were whispers, not reports. Testimonies from nearby naval vessels experiencing odd fluctuations in cognitive focus among crew, strange dreams, a low-frequency hum just below perception, navigational errors lasting only seconds but displacing courses by miles. One sailor claimed he saw lights underwater, not glowing, but pulling light toward them, bending the ocean into a darker shape. His ship was rerouted. He was never reassigned to deep-sea duty again. The working theory is both simple and terrifying. Something beneath the ocean does not want to be heard, and it wasn't until the rest of the world grew loud, until our oceans filled with sonar, with cables, with drones, with noise, that it finally had to respond. Not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a reminder that it is still there, that the silence was not absence but patience, that the world we explore, dissect and measure is not empty, but occupied by intelligences not interested in contact, in diplomacy or curiosity, only in preservation. Of what? We still don't know. But every year in that silent triangle of water, researchers notice a strange lull in acoustic activity. Instruments drift out of sync, drones slow down for no technical reason, and faintly, if you stand on the deck of a silent ship during a windless night, you might feel, not hear but feel, the pulse return. 4 notes. A breath in the deep, and the ocean once again remembering to speak. Part 35. The creature that swam in circles for centuries. In 2006, a team of researchers analyzing movement patterns in the South Pacific via long-term satellite drift buoys noticed something bizarre. An enormous object, far larger than any known marine life, was circling in an exact elliptical path at depths below 3,000 meters. The path was slow, taking over 12 days to complete a full orbit, and yet it was consistent. In fact, historical data revealed that the motion wasn't new. This same elliptical pattern had been occurring, uninterrupted, for decades. When they extended their study using declassified Cold War naval acoustic data, they found references to a similar anomaly as far back as 1971, and the more they looked, the further back it went. This thing, whatever it was, had been moving in the same precise path since the 1940s, maybe earlier, and it had never stopped. The object, unofficially labeled Entity 6261, defied every biological model known to science. Its acoustic signature was soft but dense, like a slow reverberation through muscle and cartilage. No bones, no hollow lung cavities, just mass. And yet, it didn't drift like a dead whale. It moved with purpose, tight and steady. Not a creature lost, but one committed to the same path over and over again. A living metronome in the blackness of the deep. Attempts to locate the entity visually failed. Submersibles lost their orientation near its predicted coordinates. Drones lost signal. The few that returned showed strange distortions on their cameras, like low-resolution static wrapped in a sphere of perfect darkness. No thermal signature, no visible form, just shadow, surrounded by a curious absence of life. Even microorganisms, normally teeming in the nutrient-rich deep, were gone. Water samples returned almost sterile, like the entire region had been scrubbed of biological presence. This dead zone followed the entity in a perfect ring, as if its very existence disrupted the foundation of life itself. Plankton died. Fish turned away. Predators never entered. Whatever it was, the ocean knew to avoid it. One theory proposed by a fringe but growing group of marine researchers suggests that Entity 6261 isn't a creature in the traditional sense. It's a kind of biological satellite, programmed to move in this precise path for reasons beyond survival or instinct. Some call it a sentinel, others, a jailer, a guardian perhaps of something locked away beneath the ocean floor. And this theory gains chilling support when considering the pattern of its orbit. The ellipse passes directly over a section of seabed, known as the hollow plate, an unusually thin region of Earth's crust. It's geologically unstable, riddled with fractures and vents, some natural, others less easy to explain. In 1993, a deep-sea borehole near this region collapsed, even though no seismic activity was recorded. Divers, military, not civilian, were pulled from the mission, and the event buried under geological reclassification. But those who've studied the path of Entity 6261 notice something else. Every 19 orbits, roughly once every 240 days, the creature stops, just for a few minutes, always at the same point, always in the dead center of the hollow plate. Then it continues, as if checking a lock, ensuring it's still closed. Why would a creature of such magnitude move with such precise repetition, unless it had a task? Perhaps this isn't migration, perhaps it's patrol. And then came the signal. In 2014, during one of the entity's passes, deep acoustic monitors picked up a low-frequency rumble from directly beneath the hollow plate, not from the creature, from below it. The rumble wasn't continuous, but shuddered, like something massive shifting in its sleep. A delayed echo followed, 4 minutes later, reverberating through the rock layers beneath the ocean. When it reached the surface, it collapsed several instruments along a research line, as if the vibration didn't move through space, but through perception itself. Entity 6261 didn't react. It continued its orbit. Some researchers believe that was the point, that the creature is not just bound to that path, it's maintaining it, reinforcing a boundary that, if left unchecked, might weaken. That what lies beneath the hollow plate is not tectonic activity or volcanic pressure, but something sealed, something vast, something that does not move but waits. There are whispers among the few who know of this anomaly, quiet debates in closed conference rooms, redacted memos passed between departments, always ending with the same phrase in different languages: let it circle, never intervene. Because there's a fear, not that the creature might stop, but that it might fail, that one day it will return to the center of the ellipse, stop as it always has, and then never move again, and that whatever lies beneath the hollow plate will feel the change and wake up. So Entity 6261 swims on, round and round, deep and alone, the silent sentinel of a door we can never open, because it was never ours to lock.